You wouldn't believe this, but what Chloe Grant faced on her first day at Westbrook Academy was beyond any student's nightmare. The towering iron gates of Westbrook Academy gleamed under the morning sun, casting long shadows across the lush lawns and pristine gardens. To the world outside, Westbrook was more than a school, it was a fortress of privilege, where every brick seemed to whisper promises of success and prestige. The red-bricked buildings stood tall, covered in ivy, as if guarding the secrets of generations that had walked its halls. But for Chloe Grant, a quiet, thoughtful 13-year-old, Westbrook felt like an intimidating maze. Clutching her books tightly, she walked toward her first class, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Chloe's mother, Rachel Grant, a successful entrepreneur known for her charitable work, had encouraged her to embrace every opportunity the world had to offer. You belong anywhere you choose to be, Chloe. Don't let anyone make you feel less, Rachel had often reminded her, with a calm but fierce determination Chloe deeply admired. Rachel Grant was a woman of strength and grace, her success hard-earned, her reputation built on resilience and a refusal to back down. She had faced countless challenges on her way up, breaking barriers that others had told her were impenetrable. Chloe admired her mother's courage and vowed to carry that same strength in her own life, especially now, in the intimidating corridors of Westbrook Academy. As Chloe stepped into Mr. Abbott's classroom, she was hopeful, her eyes scanning the room for an open seat. Mr. Abbott was known for his strict rules and reputation as the most rigorous teacher in the academy. With his tall, graying frame and tailored suit, he seemed the very definition of authority. When he spoke, it was in a clipped, almost mechanical tone that demanded attention. Every student knew that in Mr. Abbott's class, his word was law, and any deviation would not be tolerated. Chloe found a seat near the back and settled in, keeping her gaze lowered to avoid drawing attention. She listened intently as Mr. Abbott began the lesson, his voice unwavering as he discussed themes in classic literature. After a few minutes, she felt a surge of excitement, raising her hand to add a thought to the discussion. Mr. Abbott's gaze swept the room but passed over Chloe as if she were invisible. She lowered her hand, feeling a twinge of embarrassment. A few moments later, another student, Emma Carter, a confident girl with golden hair from a prominent family, raised her hand. Mr. Abbott's face softened slightly as he acknowledged her contribution, his voice warm, almost approving. The pattern continued over the following days. Chloe noticed that each time she raised her hand, Mr. Abbott would look past her, his face tight with impatience. It was only Emma and a few others from influential backgrounds who seemed to have his attention. Chloe tried to tell herself it didn't matter. Her mother had taught her not to let people's judgment define her, but each dismissal cut a little deeper, each cold glance felt like another brick in a wall she couldn't scale. At home, she tried to keep her struggles hidden, not wanting to disappoint her mother or make her worry. Chloe could hear her mother's encouraging words in her mind, "You are more than enough. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She clung to those words like a lifeline, hoping they'd keep her strong. But as the days wore on, Mr. Abbott's behavior escalated. One afternoon, during a chemistry demonstration, he called Chloe up to assist him in front of the class. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a beaker from him, aware of the entire room watching. Mr. Abbott's voice was laced with sarcasm as he announced, "Let's see if Miss Grant can handle this without making a mess." The chuckles that followed stung, each laugh like a dagger. Chloe's cheeks flushed, and she fought to keep her expression steady. But inside, shame and anger swirled, a powerful mix that she struggled to contain. No one thought this could happen, but Mr. Abbott's cruel remarks that day would ignite a fire Chloe never saw coming. Chloe took a deep breath, steadying herself as she held the beaker. She tried to ignore the snickers of her classmates, hoping to complete the experiment without giving Mr. Abbott or anyone else further reason to laugh. But her hands were trembling. Mr. Abbott had placed her under a glaring spotlight, and she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, some gleeful, others indifferent, as if watching her fail would be just another part of their day. Is it really that difficult? Mr. Abbott sneered, his voice echoing in the silent classroom. I thought even the simplest minds could handle this. A few more chuckles erupted from the students. Chloe's grip on the beaker tightened as she felt her cheeks flush. For a moment, she thought about her mother's words, the ones she repeated every morning, stay strong. Stay proud. But here, in this room, under Mr. Abbott's piercing gaze, that strength felt hard to hold on to. She managed to pour the chemical mixture into a flask without spilling, her hands steadying as she focused on the task. But as soon as she finished, Mr. Abbott snatched the beaker from her, shaking his head in exaggerated disappointment. Barely adequate, he muttered, loud enough for the entire class to hear. But I suppose that's all we can expect, isn't it, Miss Grant? The implication stung more than his words. Chloe could feel her heart pounding in her chest, humiliation and anger swirling together. She looked down, willing herself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction. But Mr. Abbott wasn't finished. He turned to the class with a smirk, as if her discomfort was merely a stepping stone for his next lecture. Class, let this be a lesson, he announced, gesturing to Chloe as if she were an object rather than a person. Some people simply aren't made for certain environments. They might try, but ultimately, it's a futile effort. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Chloe felt her throat tighten as she fought back tears. She wanted to shout, to tell him he was wrong, that she was as capable as anyone else in this room. But she stayed silent, her fists clenched at her sides. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't make the situation worse. Mr. Abbott's disdain wasn't something she could argue away, it was embedded in every sneer, every dismissive look he cast her way. As she returned to her seat, Chloe caught the gaze of Emma Carter, who gave her a smug, almost pitying smile. The look was salt in the wound, a silent affirmation that Chloe didn't belong here. She lowered her head, feeling the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. After class, Chloe hurried out of the room, desperate to escape before anyone could see her tears. She made it to an empty hallway and leaned against the wall, letting out a shaky breath. She wanted to disappear, to fade into the background where no one would notice her or judge her for simply being herself. At that moment, Chloe felt a hand on her shoulder. Startled, she looked up to see her friend from another class, Mia, who'd come to find her after hearing about the chemistry class incident. Mia's expression was one of understanding and compassion. "Chloe, I heard what happened in class," Mia said gently. "Are you okay?" Chloe wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine. I'm used to it by now." But Mia shook her head, her eyes narrowing with a determination that surprised Chloe. "No, it's not fine. Mr. Abbott can't keep treating you like this. You deserve respect, just like anyone else. You don't have to take this." Chloe looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "But what can I do? He's a teacher. Who would believe me?" Mia placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You have people who believe in you, Chloe. Don't forget that. And maybe, it's time to let your mom know what's going on." The thought of telling her mother about the humiliations she'd been enduring made Chloe's stomach twist. She didn't want to add to her mother's worries or disappoint her. Rachel Grant had overcome so much, and Chloe didn't want to feel like a failure in her mother's eyes. But Mia's words lingered, a small spark in the darkness she'd been feeling. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else carry part of her burden. That night, as Chloe sat across from her mother at the dinner table, she felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. She glanced up, watching Rachel's calm, encouraging smile as they talked about school. Finally, taking a deep breath, Chloe decided to take Mia's advice. "Mom," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you about school. You wouldn't believe how one conversation at dinner could change everything." Rachel's hand froze, her fork hovering in midair as she heard the tremor in Chloe's voice. She could see the tension in her daughter's eyes, the weight of something held back for too long. Chloe looked down, nervously twisting her fingers together, as if gathering the strength to reveal a truth she'd buried deep inside. "Chloe, what's going on?" Rachel asked, her tone gentle yet firm. She reached out, placing a comforting hand over Chloe's. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Chloe hesitated, glancing at her mother's face, searching for reassurance. After a moment, she took a deep breath, letting the words tumble out as she described Mr. Abbott's constant remarks, the subtle put-downs that felt anything but subtle, the looks and sneers that made her feel small and inadequate. Rachel listened, her expression growing darker with each detail. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The thought of anyone, especially a teacher, treating her daughter this way filled her with a quiet fury. She kept her composure, wanting Chloe to feel safe, but her mind was already racing with questions and plans. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Rachel asked softly, her eyes full of concern. Chloe shrugged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to worry you, and I didn't think there was anything you could do. He's my teacher, Mom. No one would believe me." Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, a fierce determination settling in her eyes. "Chloe, listen to me. No one has the right to treat you like that. No one. Especially not someone who is supposed to support and guide you. I won't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Chloe nodded, a small flicker of hope lighting up in her eyes. For the first time, she felt a little less alone, like a weight had been lifted just by sharing her burden. But the anxiety lingered, twisting in her stomach as she thought about what might happen if they confronted Mr. Abbott. Rachel saw the hesitation in her daughter's face. "I'll handle this, Chloe. You don't need to worry. Just focus on being your amazing self. Leave the rest to me." That night, Rachel stayed up late, her thoughts racing. She replayed Chloe's words over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. As a mother, she'd fought her own battles with discrimination and prejudice, but hearing that her daughter was facing the same struggles, especially from someone in a position of authority, was something she couldn't accept. The next morning, Rachel walked into the school with her head held high. She felt the stares of students and teachers alike as she made her way through the hallways, her gaze unyielding. She wasn't here to make friends, she was here to stand up for her daughter. At the front office, she was met with polite smiles and a hesitant greeting from the receptionist. "Good morning. How can I help you?" the woman asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice as she took in Rachel's determined expression. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Abbott," Rachel replied, her voice firm and unwavering. The receptionist looked taken aback, her smile faltering. "Mr. Abbott is in the middle of teaching right now. Could I schedule a time for you to meet with him later?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "No, I think he can spare a moment for me. This is about my daughter, Chloe Grant, and the way she's been treated in his classroom." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, her hands fidgeting with a pen on the desk. She glanced at the clock, hesitating before finally nodding. "Let me call down to his classroom and see if he's available." As Rachel waited, she felt a steely resolve settle within her. She knew confronting Mr. Abbott directly might not change his views, but she also knew that letting him think he could mistreat Chloe without consequence was not an option. She would make it clear that her daughter was not alone, that there were people ready to stand up for her, and that Mr. Abbott's behavior would not be tolerated. After a few minutes, Mr. Abbott appeared, his expression a mix of confusion and mild irritation. He was a tall man with a stern face, the kind of person who seemed to believe he was always right. As he approached, Rachel could feel his disdain even before he spoke. "Ms. Grant," he greeted her with a thin smile. "What brings you here today?" Rachel didn't waste time with pleasantries. She looked him straight in the eye, her voice as steady as steel. "I'm here to talk about Chloe. She's shared some things with me about how you've been treating her in your class, and I'm here to make it clear that this stops now." Mr. Abbott's smile faded, replaced by a look of irritation. "Ms. Grant, I assure you, I treat all my students the same. If Chloe is struggling, perhaps it's because she's not putting in the necessary effort. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Effort has nothing to do with the kind of comments you've been making. She's an intelligent, hard-working student, and you're trying to make her feel otherwise. That stops here. Mr. Abbott crossed his arms, his tone dismissive. With all due respect, Ms. Grant, I believe you're overreacting. Chloe's education is my responsibility in this classroom, and I think I know what's best for my students. Rachel stepped closer, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. With all due respect, Mr. Abbott, my daughter deserves to learn in an environment free from prejudice and humiliation. If you can't provide that, I'll take this matter to the principal, the school board, whoever I need to, until she's given the respect she deserves. The hallway had fallen silent. A few teachers had stopped to watch the exchange, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. Mr. Abbott shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being challenged so directly. Finally, he cleared his throat, forcing a polite smile. I think we can come to an understanding, Ms. Grant, he said tightly. I assure you, Chloe will be treated with the utmost respect moving forward. Rachel held his gaze for a moment longer before nodding. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Abbott. As she turned and walked away, Rachel felt a surge of pride. She knew this wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a start. She had made it clear that Chloe wasn't alone, that she had someone willing to stand up for her, no matter what. Back at home that evening, Chloe listened as her mother recounted the confrontation with a mixture of awe and gratitude. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of empowerment, a belief that she wasn't helpless in the face of people like Mr. Abbott. In the days that followed, things in Mr. Abbott's class changed, though Chloe could tell he resented her for it. The comments stopped, replaced by a stiff, almost reluctant respect. But Chloe knew this was just the beginning. With her mother by her side, she was beginning to see that she had the power to stand up for herself, and that she deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter where she was. Sometimes, allies come from the most surprising places. The shift in Mr. Abbott's behavior did not go unnoticed. Although he now kept his sharp words to himself, the atmosphere in the classroom remained tense, and Chloe could sense the simmering resentment beneath his forced politeness. She kept her head down, doing her best to focus on her work, but every day felt like a quiet battle. One day, as Chloe was gathering her things after class, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see her friend, Mia, looking at her with a mixture of concern and determination. Mia had been a quiet presence throughout Chloe's struggles, one of the few classmates who offered silent support when things got tough. Hey, Chloe, Mia began, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I just wanted to say, I saw what's been happening with Mr. Abbott. I think it's really unfair how he treats you. Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized anyone else had noticed, let alone cared enough to speak up. Thanks, Mia, she said softly, a small smile breaking through her usual guarded expression. It's been rough. Mia nodded, her expression serious. I know. And I think it's wrong that he thinks he can get away with it. Some of us are tired of just watching him act like that. We want to do something about it. Chloe's eyes widened in surprise. Really? I thought I was alone in this. Mia shook her head firmly. You're not alone. He's been like this with a few other students too, not just you. A group of us are thinking about talking to the principal together. If we all share what we've experienced, maybe they'll listen. Chloe felt a spark of hope. For so long, she'd believed that Mr. Abbott's behavior was something she'd have to endure on her own. But here was Mia, offering her friendship and support in a way that felt genuine and powerful. That would mean a lot, Mia, Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't think anyone else cared enough to speak up. Mia squeezed her shoulder, a determined look in her eyes. We care, Chloe. And we're not going to let him keep treating people this way. We've already got a few other students who are willing to back you up. In the days that followed, Chloe and her small group of allies began to gather after school, meeting in the library to share their experiences with Mr. Abbott. Each story added another layer to the picture they were building, a picture of a teacher who wielded his authority like a weapon, using it to belittle and control those who dared to challenge him. Some students recounted incidents of Mr. Abbott singling them out for minor mistakes, while others shared stories of his passive-aggressive remarks, each one calculated to undermine their confidence. The more they shared, the clearer it became that Chloe was far from alone in her experiences. Finally, the group decided it was time to take their concerns to the principal. They prepared a list of grievances, carefully documented with dates and details, each student determined to make their voices heard. Chloe felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve as they walked into the principal's office together, each one carrying the weight of their shared stories. Principal Hughes, a serious but fair-minded man, listened intently as the students took turns describing their experiences. He nodded thoughtfully, occasionally jotting down notes, his expression growing more serious with each new account. By the time they finished, he looked at them with a mixture of empathy and determination. "I appreciate all of you coming forward," Principal Hughes said, his voice steady and reassuring. "It takes courage to speak up about these things. I want you to know that we take these concerns very seriously. I'll be meeting with Mr. Abbott to discuss this matter in detail, and I'll make sure that each of you feels safe and respected in this school." As the group filed out of the office, Chloe felt a surge of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of validation. Her voice, once silenced by fear and self-doubt, had finally been heard, and she knew that she wasn't alone in her struggle. Mia walked beside her, a triumphant smile on her face. "See? We're stronger together," she said, giving Chloe a playful nudge. "And don't worry, if Mr. Abbott tries anything else, we'll all be here to back you up." Chloe nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Mia. I don't think I could have done this without you." Together, they walked down the hallway, a newfound sense of hope and camaraderie surrounding them. Chloe knew that the road ahead might still be difficult, but she also knew that she had allies by her side, friends who believed in her, who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right. And for the first time in a long time, she felt empowered to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Sometimes, one voice can cause a ripple, but a chorus can create a wave. After their meeting with Principal Hughes, things started to change in subtle but powerful ways. Chloe noticed that Mr. Abbott seemed more subdued, almost wary, as if he realized that his actions were no longer going unnoticed. He avoided eye contact with her and the other students who had come forward, keeping his lessons strictly professional and refraining from the sarcastic jabs he'd once delivered so freely. Chloe felt a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. For so long, she had felt powerless under Mr. Abbott's judgmental gaze, as if his authority was an immovable weight pressing down on her. But now, she understood the strength that came from solidarity, from knowing that others had witnessed and shared her pain. Her confidence began to blossom, and for the first time, she felt like she had control over her own story. As the days passed, she noticed that some of her classmates looked at her with new respect. She had become a quiet symbol of resilience, a reminder that standing up for oneself, and others, could bring about real change. And while the students who had spoken out still carried the scars of their past experiences, they now walked with their heads held higher, no longer willing to tolerate the subtle injustices that had once gone unchallenged. One afternoon, Chloe was in the library when a familiar voice startled her out of her reading. "Chloe, can we talk?" She looked up to see Mr. Abbott standing there, his face drawn with an expression she'd never seen before, an awkward mix of regret and discomfort. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "Of course," Chloe replied, unsure of what to expect. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation bubbling within her. Mr. Abbott took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I wanted to apologize. I realize now that I may have been harsh, and that I may have let certain biases affect the way I treated you and some of the other students." Chloe's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. An apology was the last thing she'd imagined from a man who had seemed so unyielding, so certain in his authority. She could see the tension in his posture, the struggle it must have taken for him to say those words. "Thank you for saying that," Chloe said, keeping her voice steady. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, validation, but also a lingering hurt that couldn't be erased with just a few words. "It wasn't easy for us to come forward, but we had to make sure our voices were heard." Mr. Abbott nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "I understand. I want you to know that I'm working on being better. I don't want any student to feel the way you and the others did." Chloe gave him a small nod. "I hope you do. Because no one deserves to feel like their voice doesn't matter." As Mr. Abbott walked away, Chloe felt an overwhelming sense of closure. She knew that one conversation couldn't change everything, but it was a start, a step toward creating a safer, more inclusive environment for herself and her peers. And although she still felt the weight of her experiences, she knew that she'd grown stronger through the process. Later that day, Mia and a few of her other friends joined her in the cafeteria. They shared stories, laughter, and a renewed sense of belonging. Chloe couldn't help but marvel at how far she'd come, from feeling isolated and silenced to finding a community of people who valued her, who understood her struggles and shared her triumphs. In the weeks that followed, Chloe continued to speak up, not just for herself, but for others who might be facing their own battles. She knew now that silence was no longer an option, and that true strength came from the courage to stand united. And as she walked through the halls each day, she carried with her the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that she was part of a wave of change, a movement sparked by a single voice but strengthened by many. It was a journey that had only just begun, but Chloe knew that, together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. There are moments when a single truth, spoken out loud, can change everything. Chloe didn't think Mr. Abbott's apology would change much in her heart, but she couldn't deny how the atmosphere had shifted in the classroom. Gone were the smug looks and the pointed comments. Mr. Abbott's demeanor was more reserved now, his tone carefully neutral, almost as if he was weighing every word before he spoke it. There was a quiet tension in the air, as though he knew the students were watching him closely, ready to hold him accountable if he stepped out of line. But Chloe's journey wasn't over. The experience had opened her eyes to injustices she hadn't fully recognized before, even the subtler slights she'd witnessed or experienced over the years. She felt compelled to continue advocating for fairness, not just within Mr. Abbott's classroom, but in other areas of the school. Her confidence had grown, and with it, a new awareness of her own voice. One day, during a school assembly, Principal Hughes introduced a new initiative, a student-led diversity committee aimed at fostering understanding and inclusivity. She made an announcement, calling for volunteers to join, to help ensure every student feels seen and valued. Chloe's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for. She raised her hand without hesitation, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She glanced around and saw a few familiar faces, Mia, another classmate named Aaron, and a few others who had stood with her against Mr. Abbott's unfair treatment, also raising their hands. Together, they represented a group of students ready to make a real difference. In the first committee meeting, Principal Hughes outlined the group's mission, to hold events, lead discussions, and find ways to educate students and staff alike about diverse experiences, cultures, and backgrounds. Chloe was thrilled but also slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility. It felt like a daunting task, but one she was eager to take on. As the weeks passed, Chloe and the other committee members worked tirelessly, organizing workshops and assemblies, creating educational materials, and speaking openly about the challenges students from different backgrounds faced. It was exhausting, but Chloe found it deeply fulfilling. She felt that every conversation, every workshop, every discussion brought them a step closer to a school environment where everyone could feel safe and respected. The impact of their work became clear when students who had never spoken to Chloe before started approaching her to share their own stories. Some had experienced discrimination outside of school, others in their own homes or communities. Chloe listened to each one, offering encouragement and, more importantly, understanding. She realized that the ripple she had started was growing, becoming a wave of voices standing together against prejudice. Then one day, in a surprising twist, Mr. Abbott himself joined one of the committee meetings as an observer. The sight of him there, sitting quietly at the back of the room, sent a wave of mixed emotions through Chloe. But she continued with the meeting, determined to show him what their efforts were all about. Afterward, he approached her. "I just wanted to say, I see the work you're doing, Chloe. And I respect it." Chloe nodded, offering him a polite but restrained smile. She knew that forgiveness was a process, and she wasn't quite ready to fully let go of everything she had felt under his teaching. But she appreciated the acknowledgement, and it gave her a sense of closure. In the months that followed, the diversity committee grew, drawing students from all grades and backgrounds. They began implementing changes in the school's policies, establishing stricter guidelines for respectful behavior, and introducing new cultural events to celebrate diversity. They even started a peer mentorship program where students could support each other through difficult experiences. One evening, as Chloe sat in her room reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized how much she had changed. She had gone from feeling like an invisible target in Mr. Abbott's class to becoming a leader, an advocate for change. And though the journey hadn't been easy, she felt grateful for every step that had brought her here. Chloe knew there would always be more work to do, but she was ready for it. She had learned the power of truth, how speaking up could not only change her own life but inspire others to do the same. And as she looked ahead, she knew that this was only the beginning of a lifetime of courage, resilience, and commitment to justice. Sometimes, a single act of courage can spark a movement. Chloe had come a long way since that dark day in Mr. Abbott's classroom. She no longer hesitated to speak her mind, not just for herself but for others too. The diversity committee had grown beyond her wildest dreams, gathering students from all backgrounds who wanted to make their school a better place. Together, they were building something new, a place where everyone had a voice, where respect was a given, not something you had to fight for. As word spread about the committee's work, other schools began reaching out, asking for guidance on how to set up similar initiatives. Principal Hughes, impressed by Chloe's leadership, invited her to speak at a district-wide assembly for teachers and administrators. Chloe was nervous, this would be the biggest audience she'd ever addressed. But she knew how important it was to tell her story, to show how even small actions could have a big impact. When the day of the assembly arrived, Chloe stood in front of hundreds of educators and students, her hands shaking slightly as she held the microphone. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of all the people who believed in her, all the students who had confided in her, and everyone who had supported her through her journey. She began with her own story, how Mr. Abbott's words had hurt her and how she had found the strength to stand up against the injustice she faced. She spoke about the committee and how they were working to make the school a safe place for everyone. As she talked, she saw nods of understanding and even tears in the eyes of a few teachers. Then, she shared one of the most powerful lessons she had learned: if we want real change, we have to be willing to listen to each other. It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary. We all have biases, and acknowledging them is the first step toward becoming better. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet before the applause started, building into a standing ovation. Chloe's heart swelled with pride, not just for herself, but for every student who had faced injustice and found the courage to stand up against it. This wasn't just her victory, it belonged to all of them. After the assembly, several teachers approached her, thanking her for sharing her story and vowing to make changes in their own classrooms. Chloe was overwhelmed by the response, but it gave her hope that real, lasting change was possible. Back at school, Chloe's life became busier than ever. Students she had never met before started seeking her out for advice or just to talk. She realized that people were beginning to see her as a leader, someone they could trust. It was a heavy responsibility, but Chloe felt ready to take it on. Even Mr. Abbott's behavior had changed. He treated her and the other students with newfound respect, his once dismissive attitude replaced by a cautious humility. One day, as he handed back an essay she had written, he paused and looked at her with a sincerity she had never seen before. "This is excellent work, Chloe. You should be proud." Chloe accepted the compliment with a quiet smile. She knew that he had a long way to go in unlearning his biases, but it was a start. As Chloe continued her work, she felt the ripples of change spreading, affecting not only her school but the larger community. She had become part of something bigger than herself, something that gave her life new meaning and purpose. And while she knew there would still be challenges ahead, she also knew that she had the strength to face them, and a community to support her. Chloe had once felt invisible, but now, she was a force to be reckoned with. And as she looked toward the future, she was ready for whatever came next. Just when Chloe thought things were finally changing for good, reality hit her hard. A few weeks after the assembly, things took an unexpected turn. Despite Chloe's growing influence and the momentum behind the diversity committee, there were still forces pushing back against the changes they were working toward. Not everyone was supportive. Some people saw the committee as disruptive, an uncomfortable reminder of issues they would rather ignore. Tension simmered beneath the surface, and Chloe could feel it. One afternoon, Chloe found a flyer crumpled in her locker. When she smoothed it out, her stomach dropped. It was a hateful message, laced with racial slurs, calling her efforts a waste of time and troublemaking. The note ended with a chilling line, "You're stirring things up that should stay buried." Chloe felt a wave of nausea, her hands trembling as she gripped the paper. She thought of how far they had come and felt a pang of anger and frustration. How could anyone be so hateful? For the first time in a long while, Chloe felt that old feeling of isolation creeping back. She wondered if she should tell her mom or Principal Hughes, but part of her hesitated. She didn't want them to worry, and she didn't want to feel like a burden. But the fear weighed on her, making her question if their efforts were worth the price. That evening, Chloe sat alone in her room, the crumpled flyer on her desk. She thought about how hard she and her friends had worked, the risks they had taken, and the courage it took to face discrimination head-on. Just then, her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, "Hey, are you okay? Haven't seen you all day." Chloe hesitated, unsure if she wanted to talk, but then she remembered that she didn't have to go through this alone. She responded with a simple, "Can we talk?" Within minutes, Emma was at her door, bringing a sense of calm with her presence. Chloe showed her the flyer, her voice shaking as she shared her fears. Emma's face hardened with anger as she read the words. "This is disgusting, Chloe. Whoever wrote this is just scared because they know you're making a difference. They're cowards." Hearing Emma's words gave Chloe a glimmer of strength. "Maybe," she murmured, "but it's just so frustrating. Every time we make progress, there's always someone trying to tear it down." Emma nodded, her voice softening. "Change scares people, especially when it makes them confront things they'd rather ignore. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth fighting for. You've inspired so many people, Chloe. Don't let this stop you." Chloe's heart felt lighter, the tightness in her chest easing as Emma's words sank in. She knew she couldn't let one hateful message undo everything they had accomplished. She was stronger than that. They all were. The next day, Chloe met with Principal Hughes to show him the flyer. His face darkened as he read it, and he promised to investigate. "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, Chloe," he said, his tone earnest. "But know that the school stands behind you, and we will not tolerate this kind of behavior." With the school's support, Chloe felt more determined than ever. She brought the issue to the committee, using it as a reminder of why their work was so important. The flyer became a rallying point for the group, reminding them of the resistance they faced and why they needed to keep pushing forward. As they gathered around, Chloe spoke from her heart. "I know this isn't easy, and I know we're going to face more setbacks like this. But we're doing something that matters, something that can make a real difference. And no hateful words can take that away." In that moment, Chloe felt a renewed sense of purpose. She looked around at her friends, who were all nodding, their eyes filled with determination. They were all in this together, and they wouldn't let fear or hatred stop them. But Chloe also knew that the fight for change was far from over. This was only one battle in a much larger struggle, and she was ready to face it head-on, no matter how many challenges came their way. No one warned Chloe about the quiet battles that would happen behind the scenes. The hateful flyer was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Chloe began to feel the weight of unseen forces working against her and the Diversity Committee. It wasn't always as obvious as the flyer, but it was there, in the glances in the hallways, the subtle remarks from some teachers, the emails she received late at night, always anonymous, questioning her motives. The support from Principal Hughes and the rest of her friends kept her going, but the relentless pressure was starting to take its toll. It wasn't just the overt acts of racism that were wearing her down, it was the quiet, insidious forms of resistance. The teachers who would change the subject when Chloe brought up the committee during class. The classmates who pretended not to hear her when she made a comment about discrimination. The dismissive looks from some of her peers when she tried to talk about the need for change. She began to realize that some of the worst enemies weren't the people making direct attacks but those who stayed silent. The ones who were too comfortable to speak up or who tried to ignore the problems around them. The worst part was that she couldn't fight them the same way, there were no flyers, no explicit hate to confront. It was the slow erosion of support, the quiet undermining of her efforts, that was making her feel increasingly isolated. One day, after another class where a teacher had brushed aside her suggestion for more inclusive lessons, Chloe walked out into the courtyard and sat down on one of the benches. Her mind was spinning. She had worked so hard, yet it felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. She thought of her mom's words, "The fight for justice is never easy, Chloe. It's messy and frustrating, but it's worth it." As Chloe sat there, lost in thought, she was joined by Emma, who had apparently been searching for her. Without saying a word, Emma sat down next to Chloe, offering a silent comfort. Chloe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had been holding inside. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Chloe admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just too much. I thought it would get better, but it's only getting harder." Emma looked at her, her expression serious. "Chloe, I know it feels impossible right now, but you've already done so much. You've opened eyes. You've changed minds. And you've started something bigger than you realize. But you don't have to do this alone." Chloe looked up at Emma, a sense of guilt flooding her. "I feel like I'm failing. Every time I think we're making progress, something happens that reminds me how much more work there is to do." Emma shook her head. "You're not failing. You're up against systems that have been in place for years, centuries even. It's not going to change overnight. But it will change, Chloe. You've already started it. And I'll be here every step of the way." For the first time in days, Chloe felt a spark of hope. She realized that this fight wasn't just about her, it was about the future, and it was bigger than any one person. And she had a team. She had friends who believed in her, who would stand by her, no matter how hard it got. Just then, Principal Hughes appeared at the gate of the courtyard, his expression serious. Chloe stood up to meet him, already knowing why he was there. "Chloe," he began, "I need to speak with you about something important." His voice was steady but had a somber tone. "There's been some troubling developments. Some anonymous emails have surfaced, attempting to discredit your committee, questioning the legitimacy of the work you're doing. We're investigating it, but I wanted you to know that the school is fully behind you." Chloe's heart sank as she listened to him, but she nodded. She wasn't surprised. The subtle undermining had started, and she knew it wouldn't stop there. But she also knew that she couldn't let it stop her. The emails, the rumors, they were just distractions. She had a bigger mission, one that couldn't be deterred by a few cowardly voices. "Thank you, Principal Hughes," Chloe said, her voice steady now. "But I'm not giving up. No matter what they throw at me, I'll keep pushing." Emma stood by her side, her presence a constant reminder of the strength they had in numbers. And though Chloe was afraid, she wasn't going to back down. The battle was far from over, but now, more than ever, she knew she had what it took to fight it. You won't believe what Chloe did when they tried to silence her. The emails, the whispered rumors, the silent judgment, it all came crashing down on Chloe in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just that the opposition was relentless, it was the realization that those in positions of power were subtly encouraging it. Chloe had expected resistance from her classmates, but to see teachers, even some who had initially supported her, back away was devastating. She knew now that the struggle was far bigger than she had anticipated. But what shook her the most was the sudden, unexpected blow. One afternoon, as Chloe walked to the library, she overheard a conversation that made her stop in her tracks. Two teachers, Mr. Grant and Mrs. Elliot, were standing in the hallway, their voices low but clear enough for Chloe to hear. "I'm just saying, this whole diversity push is going too far," Mr. Grant said, his tone dismissive. "There's no need to make everything about race. It's disrupting the atmosphere of the school." Mrs. Elliot nodded. "Exactly. It's causing more division than unity. The students are starting to get too sensitive. This whole thing with Chloe, it's a problem. I think we need to find a way to, take the heat off before it gets worse." Chloe's stomach twisted with disgust. It was the moment she realized that the challenge she was facing wasn't just about fighting ignorance, it was about dismantling deeply ingrained systems that were actively trying to suppress the truth. They weren't just trying to discredit her, they were trying to erase the very conversation about racism that she had started. Her heart raced as she walked away, her mind buzzing with a mix of anger and disbelief. How could they be so blind? How could they not see how desperately this needed to change? She felt the familiar sting of exhaustion. It wasn't just the emotional weight of the battle, it was the constant feeling of being watched, judged, and undermined. The stress was becoming unbearable. She had done everything she could to keep fighting, to push for the change she believed in. But now, with the pressure mounting from all sides, Chloe wondered if it was enough. As she sat down at the lunch table with Emma, she felt a sense of isolation creeping in. The cafeteria was loud, the chatter of students filling the space, but for Chloe, it was as though the noise had faded into the background. She felt small, out of place in a world that seemed to be fighting against her every move. Emma noticed immediately. "Chloe, you okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. Chloe didn't look up at first. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said, her voice almost breaking. "It's like I'm fighting against something that's too big for me. And every time I think I've made a difference, something else happens." Emma put a hand on Chloe's. "You've already made a difference. You've opened people's eyes, even when they don't want to see it. This fight isn't going to be easy, but you're not alone. I'm here, and so is everyone else who believes in what you're doing." Chloe looked up at Emma, tears welling in her eyes. "But it's not just about me, Emma. This isn't just about one person. This is about everyone who's been silenced, everyone who's been pushed down for too long. I don't know how to keep going when it feels like I'm not getting through to anyone." Emma's grip tightened. "You are getting through. You just can't see it yet. It's not about one conversation or one battle. It's about the long game. And trust me, Chloe, you've already won more than you think." But just as Chloe felt a brief moment of reassurance, she received an unexpected text message that shook her to her core. It was from Principal Hughes. "Chloe, we need to talk." There's been an incident. I don't want to alarm you, but I think you need to be aware of what's happening. Her heart skipped a beat. She excused herself from the table and quickly read the rest of the message. The school board had called an emergency meeting, and the diversity committee was under review. The exact reasons weren't clear, but Chloe knew exactly what this was about. The whispers, the subtle undermining, had reached the highest levels. She stood frozen, her mind racing. Was this the moment she had feared? The moment when they tried to erase everything she had worked for? With a deep breath, Chloe wiped the tears from her eyes and stood tall. She wasn't going to let them take this from her. She had come too far to back down now. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every student who had ever been told their voice didn't matter. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. But Chloe knew one thing, she wasn't going to let them silence her. Not now. Not ever. The most surprising thing Chloe did next was something no one could have predicted. The school hallways were eerily quiet as Chloe made her way to the principal's office. She had been summoned there after receiving the cryptic message. Her thoughts raced, her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to let the fear consume her. This was the moment that would define everything, not just for her, but for every student who had ever been made to feel like their voice didn't matter. As she reached the office, she was greeted by Principal Hughes, who was sitting behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Chloe, I'm glad you could make it. Please, have a seat," he said, his voice professional, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Chloe couldn't ignore. Chloe didn't sit. Instead, she stood in the center of the room, facing him directly. She wasn't going to let him make her feel small anymore. "I know what this is about," she said firmly. "The school board wants to shut down the diversity committee, and you're planning on backing them up." Principal Hughes's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't deny it. "Chloe, I think you're misinterpreting the situation," he said, his tone measured. "This isn't about silencing your voice. It's about finding balance. The committee is becoming a distraction. We need to focus on the bigger picture, on the overall success of the school." Chloe's jaw tightened. "No. What this is about is your fear. Fear of the truth coming to light. You're afraid of the real conversations happening, of the change we're demanding. And you're trying to stop it before it gets any further." Hughes looked at her for a long moment, then sighed, clearly tired. "Chloe, you're a smart young woman. I respect you. But you need to understand that these things are not as simple as you think. There are consequences to pushing for change, especially when it disrupts the status quo. And what about the consequences of letting racism continue unchecked?" Chloe shot back, her voice unwavering. "What about the students who have been ignored for years? The ones who are told they don't matter, that their experiences aren't worth listening to?" There was a brief silence, and for the first time, Chloe saw a flicker of uncertainty in Principal Hughes's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but Chloe cut him off. "You don't get it, do you? You don't understand what it's like to be the only person in the room who isn't heard, to be the one who is always silenced. But I'm done being silent. I'm not going to let you stop me." Principal Hughes looked at her, his expression tight. "Chloe, this isn't just about you. You're dragging the school into a mess that we don't need. You're alienating your peers, your teachers. You have to think about the bigger picture." Chloe stepped forward, her voice rising with conviction. "The bigger picture? The bigger picture is a school where every student feels valued. The bigger picture is creating a space where we can talk about what's wrong, not ignore it because it's uncomfortable. The bigger picture is making sure that no one ever feels like they're invisible again." Her words hung in the air, thick with the weight of truth. Principal Hughes remained silent, staring at her, as if he were weighing every word she said. Chloe could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she held her ground. Just then, the door opened, and Emma walked in. Chloe had no idea how long Emma had been standing outside, but there she was, standing beside her, giving Chloe the strength to face the challenge. Emma's presence was a reminder that Chloe wasn't alone, they were in this together. "Principal Hughes," Emma said, her voice steady but firm, "Chloe's right. This isn't just about one student. It's about the entire school. You can't just sweep racism under the rug because it's easier. You can't shut down the conversations that need to happen. We deserve better than that." Chloe turned to Emma, her heart swelling with gratitude. The support she had been seeking all along was standing right beside her. Principal Hughes glanced between the two of them, clearly uncomfortable, but there was no turning back now. Chloe had made her stand, and she was not backing down. "We've been silent for too long," Chloe continued, her voice gaining strength. "This isn't just about one committee or one protest. This is about our future, about making sure we are all treated with the dignity we deserve. And if you don't believe that, then maybe you're part of the problem." For the first time in the conversation, Principal Hughes looked defeated. He rubbed his temples, clearly caught between his role as an administrator and the undeniable truth that Chloe had laid out for him. Chloe and Emma stood their ground, waiting in silence, the tension thick in the room. Chloe could hear her own breath as she waited for him to speak. Finally, he let out a long breath and sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Chloe. "You're right," he said quietly. "This isn't just about policy. This is about real people. We'll have another meeting with the school board. We'll discuss how to keep moving forward without ignoring the voices that need to be heard." Chloe felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The change she had started was far from over. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm but grateful. "But this isn't over. We won't stop until everyone has a seat at the table." As she and Emma left the office, Chloe felt a quiet sense of victory. It wasn't a win that would change everything overnight, but it was a start. A crack in the wall, a glimpse of the change she had been fighting for. And she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The final stand had been made. And Chloe had won. No one could have predicted the ripple effect Chloe's victory would have on the rest of the school. In the days following the meeting with Principal Hughes, Chloe could feel a shift in the air. It wasn't immediate, but the signs were there. The halls that had once felt oppressive with their silence were now charged with the quiet murmur of whispered conversations. Students who had once kept their heads down now met Chloe's eyes with a mix of admiration and curiosity. The Diversity Committee had not only survived the school board's initial objections, but it had been given a newfound legitimacy. The board, pressured by the wave of student and teacher support, had agreed to hold a forum where every voice could be heard. This wasn't just about diversity anymore, it was about justice, about equity, about the truth that had been buried for too long. Chloe's phone buzzed with messages from friends and classmates alike. Some were congratulating her, others were asking how they could get involved in the next steps. Even people who had stayed silent during the initial protests were reaching out, suddenly eager to show their support. But not everyone was happy with the change. Chloe knew that. She had seen the subtle looks, the way some teachers avoided her gaze. She could almost feel the tension building. The people who had once kept their privilege hidden were starting to see it slip away, and they weren't going to let that go quietly. Emma was beside her in all of this, the quiet ally who had become a powerful force of change. They worked late into the evenings, planning the upcoming forum, drafting policies, and rallying other students to join them. It wasn't easy, the administration still had their doubts, the school board wasn't fully on board, and there were those who openly resisted. But Chloe couldn't afford to stop now. The stakes were too high. One afternoon, as Chloe and Emma were going over some notes for the forum, Chloe received a call from her mom. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. She had been so wrapped up in everything happening at school that she hadn't spoken to her mom in a few days. "Hey, Mom," Chloe answered, trying to sound calm, though she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Chloe, I need you to come home right now," her mom's voice trembled with urgency. "There's something you need to see." Chloe's stomach dropped. "What happened? Is everything okay?" I don't know how to explain this. Just come home. Please," her mom pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. Without thinking, Chloe grabbed her bag and told Emma she had to leave. Emma nodded, concern written across her face, but Chloe didn't have the time to explain. The tone in her mother's voice left her no room for questions. As Chloe made her way home, her mind raced. What could have happened? Was it something at school? Was it about the diversity committee? She couldn't make sense of it, but she knew one thing for sure: whatever it was big. When she arrived home, her mom was standing by the front door, looking pale and anxious. She quickly ushered Chloe inside. "What's going on, Mom?" Chloe asked, trying to hide the panic in her voice. Her mom led her into the living room, where Chloe saw a stack of papers on the coffee table. There were newspaper clippings, articles, and printouts of emails. Chloe's heart sank as she scanned the papers, her mind trying to process what she was seeing. "Mom, what's all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mom hesitated, then spoke. "I found these online. They're about the board members. They've been making deals with organizations that have connections to hate groups." Chloe froze, her blood running cold. "What? Are you sure?" Her mom nodded. "I'm afraid so. I didn't want to tell you, but you need to know. The people in power here aren't just trying to suppress the diversity committee. They're part of something much bigger, something dangerous." Chloe felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over her. How could this be true? It seemed impossible, but the evidence was right in front of her. The people who had been overseeing her school, the ones who were supposed to be supporting her and her classmates, were linked to organizations that thrived on hate and division. "Mom, we need to do something about this," Chloe said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We can't let them get away with this." "I know," her mom said, her eyes hardening with determination. "But we need to be careful. These people have power, and if they find out we're onto them, things could get very dangerous." Chloe nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had already fought so hard to make a difference, and now they were up against something much bigger. The fight was no longer just about changing the school system. It was about taking on a network of hatred and corruption that ran deep within their community. Over the next few days, Chloe and her mom worked in secret, gathering as much information as they could. They started to piece together the connections between the board members and the hate groups they were involved with. It wasn't easy, and Chloe knew they were walking a dangerous line, but she couldn't back down. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. Then, just as they were preparing to go public with their findings, Chloe received an anonymous letter. It was short, just a few lines, but it made her blood run cold. "You've made a dangerous enemy. Leave this alone, or you'll regret it." Chloe stared at the letter, her hand trembling. This was no longer just about fighting for justice. They had stepped into a much darker world, one where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. But Chloe wasn't scared. Not anymore. The fight was far from over. The truth was out there, and Chloe was going to make sure it saw the light of day, no matter the cost. The moment Chloe held that letter in her hands, she knew there was no turning back. The following days felt like they were unfolding in slow motion, each minute heavier than the last. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that their work was about to provoke a reaction from those in power. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from Emma, students, and faculty all urging her to take caution, but Chloe knew deep down that retreat wasn't an option. Not now, not after everything that had happened. With the letter weighing heavily on her mind, Chloe spent every waking hour poring over documents with her mom. The network of hate groups and their insidious influence was starting to take shape, and it wasn't just about the school board anymore, it was a web that stretched far beyond their small town, affecting the very fabric of their community. Every clue they uncovered made her more determined to see this through, but the danger was real, and Chloe couldn't ignore the fact that they were being watched. Chloe kept a low profile at school, focusing on the upcoming diversity forum, but the unease lingered. She didn't want to show fear, but she was starting to feel it creeping up her spine. Emma had become her lifeline in all of this, checking in regularly and offering her support, but Chloe had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. They were playing a dangerous game, one where the stakes were no longer just about fairness and equality, it was about survival. The community forum was scheduled for the following week. The buzz around it had grown as word spread about the students taking a stand, about the teachers and parents who supported them, and about the rumors that some of the administration was involved in shady dealings. It was supposed to be a turning point, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that it was going to be a battleground. Then, just days before the forum, something happened that sent everything spiraling. Chloe was at her locker after school, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, when she noticed a group of students gathered around the hallway. At first, she thought it was just the usual chatter, but something about it felt off. The crowd was tense, their whispers charged with an energy that Chloe couldn't quite place. She approached cautiously, her curiosity pulling her closer. When she finally caught a glimpse of what was going on, her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the circle stood one of the students from the school board, a girl named Lily Reynolds. She had always been a quiet, reserved student, someone Chloe had never really noticed before, but now her eyes were wide with fear. She was holding up a phone, its screen displaying a video. Chloe's heart raced as she walked closer. The video was grainy, but there was no mistaking what was happening. It showed a meeting between some of the school board members and men in dark suits, talking in hushed voices in a hotel room. The men in the video were familiar, Chloe had seen their names in the files her mom had uncovered. They were associated with hate groups, some of the same organizations that had been pushing for anti-diversity policies at the school. Lily's hands were trembling as she showed the video to the crowd, her voice barely audible. "I found this hidden on one of the board members' laptops," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They've been making deals, trying to keep us silent. They're planning something bigger." Chloe's mind raced. This was the proof they had been looking for, the smoking gun that would expose everything. But as she glanced around the room, Chloe could see the fear in the eyes of her classmates. Some of them were clearly terrified, afraid of the repercussions that might come with revealing such a damning secret. Others, however, were starting to look angry, their fists clenching as they realized just how deep the corruption went. "We need to show this to the whole school," Chloe said, her voice ringing with authority. She wasn't sure where the courage came from, but it was there, and it was unshakable. "This is the truth. This is what they've been hiding." Lily nodded, still visibly shaking. "But, what if they come after us? What if they try to stop us?" Chloe paused, feeling the weight of the question. She had been asking herself the same thing. But the truth was undeniable, the more they tried to hide it, the more dangerous it became. This wasn't just about standing up to the administration. It was about something bigger, something that affected every student and every teacher in that building. "I don't know what will happen," Chloe said, her voice steady, "but I do know this, if we don't fight back, nothing will ever change. We have to do this for ourselves, for the future." The crowd was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to nod in agreement. The decision was made. Chloe and Lily worked together to spread the video, distributing it anonymously to students and faculty alike. It wasn't long before the entire school had seen it. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some students rallied around Chloe, offering their support, while others fell silent, unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear, the school was no longer the same. The walls that had kept the truth hidden for so long were crumbling. The following day, the Diversity Forum went ahead as planned. The tension was palpable as students, teachers, and parents filled the auditorium, waiting for the event to begin. Chloe sat at the front, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she knew there was no turning back now. When Principal Hughes stepped up to the podium, there was no applause, only silence. Chloe could see the nervousness in his posture, the way his hands shook as he held the microphone. He cleared his throat, but before he could speak, a student from the back of the room stood up, holding a tablet. "Principal Hughes," the student called, his voice cutting through the silence, "I think we need to talk about something first." The room went still. Chloe's stomach tightened as she realized what was happening. The student played the video for everyone to see. The faces of the board members, the men in the hotel room, the whispered conversations, it was all there. The audience erupted into murmurs, disbelief, and anger. Chloe could feel the shift in the air, the realization that the people who had been entrusted with their education had betrayed them. And in that moment, Chloe knew they had won. But the battle was far from over. The fight to expose the truth had only just begun. The world outside the auditorium felt like it had been turned upside down. The air in the school auditorium was thick with tension. The video played out on the screen, the images of corruption flashing before everyone's eyes. Whispers turned into shouts, and the room seemed to tremble under the weight of the truth. Chloe stood at the front, watching it unfold, her heart pounding, but there was no feeling of victory, only the realization that the hardest part was yet to come. Principal Hughes stood frozen, his face ashen. He didn't move, didn't speak, as the video continued to play, exposing the deep-seated rot within the school board. The once calm and controlled environment was now chaotic, with students, parents, and teachers reacting in disbelief. Some were angry, others were scared. But for Chloe, it was clear that their small act of defiance had set off a storm they couldn't contain. Emma was at Chloe's side, her hand clutching Chloe's tightly, her knuckles white from the pressure. "Do you think they'll shut it down? Do you think they'll blame you?" Emma whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Chloe didn't answer immediately. Her mind was running a mile a minute, weighing the consequences of what had just happened. She knew they had gone too far to back down now. The video had been out there for all to see. It was undeniable, and the ripple effect would be impossible to stop. The truth had been laid bare, and they couldn't take it back. The principal finally spoke, though his voice lacked the usual authority. "Everyone, please, remain calm. We'll address this." But the crowd was already in an uproar. Students stood, shouting, demanding accountability. Parents joined in, some furious, others in tears, as they realized how deep the conspiracy ran. Chloe could hear them calling for resignations, for investigations, for justice. As the room descended into chaos, Chloe felt a wave of dread wash over her. This wasn't just about school policies anymore. This was a full-blown battle against the people who held power over their lives, people who would do anything to protect their secrets, even if it meant destroying anyone who got in their way. She turned to Emma. "We need to get out of here," Chloe said, her voice firm. "It's not safe. Not anymore." Emma nodded, her face pale. They had expected pushback, but this was different. The stakes were higher now. They had given the truth to the world, but the world wasn't ready for it. As Chloe and Emma hurried through the crowd, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. The students and parents were focused on the screen, on the video, but Chloe knew better. The people in power, the ones they had exposed, wouldn't just let this slide. There would be consequences. Chloe had no illusions about that. The next few days were a blur. News outlets picked up the story, the video making headlines in the local press. The school board held an emergency meeting, promising to launch an investigation, but Chloe knew better than to trust their words. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, and she could already feel the pressure mounting. Anonymous threats began to surface, texts, emails, phone calls, warning her to stop, to stay silent. But Chloe couldn't, she wouldn't. Her mother, always the steady presence, reminded her to stay strong. This isn't over, Chloe. You've started something, but it's going to get harder before it gets better. Chloe spent the next few days coordinating with Emma, Lily, and the other students involved. They kept the momentum going, demanding answers and continuing to fight for justice. But even as they gained support, it was clear that there were forces working behind the scenes to silence them. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was early morning when Chloe's phone rang. She recognized the number, it was her mother's. But the voice on the other end wasn't her mother's. Chloe Thompson. The voice was cold, male. This is Detective Taylor. I need you to come down to the station. We need to talk. Chloe's stomach dropped. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it out loud made it real. She glanced at Emma, who was sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Emma's face mirrored her own concern. What's this about? Chloe asked, her voice tight. I can't go into details right now, Detective Taylor said, his tone brusque. But I suggest you come in as soon as possible. Things are getting complicated. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't need to be told that this was a direct result of everything that had happened. The video, the unrest, the exposure of the school board, it was all coming back to her. The people she had called out weren't just going to disappear. I'll be there soon, Chloe said, trying to steady her shaking hands. As she hung up the phone, the weight of the situation hit her all at once. Emma stood up, her eyes wide. Chloe, they're going to try to pin this on you, aren't they? Chloe nodded, her mind racing. They'll do whatever they can to make me the scapegoat. But I'm not backing down. Not now. Together, they made their way to the police station, the air heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as they entered the building. She could feel the eyes of those around her, the disapproving stares of those who had always sided with the establishment, the ones who had never questioned the power structure. When Chloe stepped into the interrogation room, Detective Taylor was already there, sitting behind a desk with a folder in front of him. He didn't smile when she entered, but his eyes didn't seem hostile either, just focused, calculating. Sit down, Miss Thompson, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We need to talk about the video. Chloe took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had expected this, the intimidation, the pressure. But she wouldn't let them break her. Not this time. I've got nothing to hide, she said, her voice steady. You want to talk about the truth? Let's talk. As the door closed behind her, Chloe knew one thing for sure, they had ignited something that couldn't be put out. The fire had already started, and there was no stopping it now. They thought the truth would fade into the background, but Chloe knew it was just the beginning. The room was cold, sterile, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering above her. Chloe sat across from Detective Taylor, trying to keep her composure despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. She had known this moment would come, the questioning, the pressure, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the situation. Detective Taylor's eyes remained fixed on her, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. Finally, he broke the silence. You realize what you've done, right? His voice was low, almost measured. You've caused a lot of trouble, Chloe. A lot of people are unhappy with you. Chloe didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze directly. I've done what needed to be done, she replied, her voice steady. The truth was out there, and someone had to make sure it was heard. Taylor leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. You really think you're helping? This is bigger than you. These people you've exposed. They're not going to let this slide. They'll do anything to make you regret this. Chloe swallowed, but she wasn't going to back down. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. I didn't ask for this, detective. But I'm not going to apologize for it either. He let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple as if he were dealing with a particularly difficult child. It's not about what you think you're doing, Chloe. It's about what's going to happen next. You're in over your head. The school board, the people in power, they'll do whatever it takes to cover this up. And you're their target. For a brief moment, Chloe felt the weight of his words. She had already seen the lengths to which people would go to maintain their power. The anonymous threats, the smear campaigns. But she couldn't back down now. She wouldn't. What do you want from me? Chloe asked, her voice sharp, her patience wearing thin. Detective Taylor stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. We know you have connections. The video didn't just come from nowhere. You've got some allies, people who helped you make this happen. And I know they're just as involved as you are. If you cooperate, if you give us names, maybe we can make this all go away quietly. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected an offer like that, not from the police. They were trying to force her hand, to make her betray her friends, her allies. She could already see the trap, the way they were trying to pit her against the others. I'm not a snitch, Chloe said firmly, her voice cold. I won't throw my friends under the bus, not for anyone. The detective's eyes hardened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up, pacing around the room slowly as if considering his next move. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Chloe's pulse quickened, but she didn't move. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Finally, Taylor spoke again, his tone almost condescending. You think you're the only one who's been pushed too far? You think you're the only one who's suffered? This whole thing is bigger than you can comprehend, Chloe. But if you want to keep pushing this narrative, keep playing the martyr, then I'll let you. Just don't say I didn't warn you. Chloe stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't need your warnings. I'm not afraid of you. She didn't wait for his response. She walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway, leaving Detective Taylor behind, his voice calling after her. But she kept moving, pushing forward, not looking back. As she stepped out of the building, the weight of the conversation settled on her shoulders. She had expected the pressure, but hearing the threat so clearly from the detective made it feel more real. She wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. She was fighting for her life. When she reached her car, Emma was waiting for her, pacing back and forth. Chloe could see the worry etched on her face, and her own nerves instantly eased at the sight of her best friend. What happened? Emma asked, her voice trembling. What did they say? Chloe didn't sugarcoat it. They're trying to turn me into a scapegoat. They want names. They want me to rat out everyone who helped me. But I'm not doing that. Emma exhaled in relief, but there was still a note of worry in her eyes. What now? What's the next move? Chloe didn't have an answer. Not yet. She knew they had to keep moving forward, but the path ahead was unclear. The stakes were higher than ever. The school board was already pulling strings, calling in favors, trying to twist the situation to make Chloe look like the villain. She had seen the way people who were once her allies were starting to distance themselves, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. But Chloe wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The truth had already been set in motion, and no amount of pressure or threats was going to stop her now. I'll keep fighting, Chloe said, her voice filled with quiet determination. We're not backing down. And so, the war continued, not just for Chloe, but for everyone who had been hurt by the system. Everyone who had been silenced for too long. They had ignited a fire, and Chloe would do whatever it took to see it through to the end. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They underestimated Chloe, thinking the battle was just about one voice. Now they would see the power of an entire movement. Chloe barely slept that night. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the sterile, cold room where Detective Taylor's words had hung like a noose around her neck. But every time she woke, that same fire inside her burned even brighter. She wasn't going to let them win. They couldn't. The truth was already out there, and now it had taken on a life of its own. The next morning, Chloe met Emma at a local coffee shop. The usual buzz of voices and clinking cups was muffled in Chloe's mind, her thoughts racing, but Emma's presence calmed her. They had always made a great team, and now more than ever, they would need each other. Emma slid into the seat across from Chloe, her eyes full of concern. "What are we going to do next?" Chloe took a deep breath. She wasn't sure, not entirely, but one thing was clear, they couldn't wait for things to fall apart any longer. They had to take control. "We make it bigger," Chloe said, leaning forward. "We need to show everyone what's happening, what they're trying to hide. If we stay silent, we'll be buried under their lies. But if we make it impossible for them to ignore us, if we make them answer for what they've done, then maybe we have a chance." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Chloe was proposing. "You're thinking about going public? Like, really public?" "Yes," Chloe said firmly. "We need to bring in the media, get more people talking about this. If we let the narrative stay in the hands of the people who want to shut it down, we lose." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you. We need to make sure we're prepared, though. If this blows up, they're going to come after you harder. And if they find out where the footage came from—" "I know," Chloe said quietly. "That's why we have to move fast. We can't let them control the story. We have to stay ahead." They spent the rest of the morning strategizing, talking about how to get the story into the right hands. They reached out to journalists who had a history of tackling corruption, pushing for transparency, and exposing systemic issues. It wasn't going to be easy, but Chloe had never been one to shy away from a fight. And now, she was more than ready. Later that afternoon, Chloe sat down with one of the reporters, a man named David Clark, who had already shown interest in her story. He was in his late 30s, sharp-eyed, with an urgency in his voice that told her he understood the magnitude of what they were up against. "What's the plan, Chloe?" David asked, tapping his pen against the notepad in front of him. "We go public," she replied, her eyes locked on his. "We expose everything, the video, the school board's involvement, everything they're trying to bury. But we do it on our terms. We get the media involved, bring in the voices of those who've been silenced for far too long." David paused, considering her words. He could see the fire in her eyes, the determination that had already sparked a movement. "It's risky," he said. "If we move too fast, they'll turn it on you. They'll say you're making this up, that you're just a disgruntled student with a vendetta." "I'm not making this up," Chloe said, her voice unwavering. "And I'm not the only one with a story. There are others, people who have seen what's really going on behind closed doors. We just have to find them, give them a voice." David nodded slowly. "All right. Let's do it. But we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to control the narrative." They worked tirelessly through the day, organizing everything. Chloe shared the video with trusted journalists, and they began to reach out to others who had been victims of the system. It wasn't long before the story began to snowball, picked up by local news outlets, and eventually, it reached national attention. But with the rise of public interest came the rise of danger. Chloe started receiving threats, anonymous messages, calls in the middle of the night, people warning her to stop. The pressure mounted, but she didn't falter. She had already committed herself to this cause, and she wasn't about to back down. Emma kept Chloe grounded, reminding her to stay focused. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she would say. "But we're not alone anymore. Look at how many people are starting to speak up. This is bigger than just us." One evening, as Chloe was heading home, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street from her apartment building. It wasn't unusual for cars to be parked there, but something about it felt off. She had seen the same vehicle a few times before, always at odd hours. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She quickened her pace, pulling her phone from her bag and sending a quick text to Emma, "They're watching me. I'm not sure who, but I'll be careful. Keep your phone on." Just as Chloe reached the door of her building, the SUV's headlights flashed on, blinding her for a moment. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. She couldn't afford to show fear. Inside her apartment, she locked the door and sat by the window, watching the street below. The car remained parked, its engine running for several minutes before it finally drove off. Chloe exhaled, but the feeling of unease lingered. She had known this would happen. But knowing didn't make it any easier. There were powerful people behind this fight, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. They had already shown how far they were willing to go. But Chloe was determined. The truth was out there now, and she wouldn't let anyone silence it. The movement had already begun. She had already ignited something too big to put out. And she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. They thought the walls were closing in on Chloe, but she wasn't about to let them trap her, not now, not ever. The next few days felt like a blur. The media frenzy surrounding Chloe's story was growing exponentially. News outlets from across the country were picking up the story, and every time she refreshed her social media, there was more buzz, more voices joining the conversation. People were standing up. They were speaking out. And the weight of it all pressed down on Chloe with a strange mix of hope and fear. She was being pulled in every direction, asked for interviews, for statements, for commentary on every angle of the story. She had never been in the spotlight like this, and while part of her reveled in the attention, the pressure was becoming suffocating. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. Late one night, Chloe's phone buzzed with a new message. She opened it, expecting to see a new supportive comment or an article linking to the case, but instead, her screen was filled with a chilling image, a photograph of her mother, taken from the street outside their home. The caption read, "You think you're safe? Think again. Stay out of this or your family will pay the price." Chloe's blood ran cold. She stared at the photo, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. It was taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable. Her mother, standing outside, oblivious to the camera watching her. And the words, they sent a chill through her that she couldn't shake. She immediately sent a text to Emma, "I need to talk. Now." The response was swift, "I'm on my way." Chloe didn't waste any time. She made a call to her mother, but her heart stopped when it went straight to voicemail. Her mind raced. Could they have done something to her? Was this some kind of warning? Her pulse quickened, and the fear she had tried to bury crept up again. Moments later, Emma arrived at Chloe's apartment, her face drawn with concern. "What's going on?" Chloe showed her the photo, her voice barely above a whisper. "They know where my family is. They're threatening them now." Emma's face hardened as she scanned the image. "We knew this was coming, Chloe. They're scared. And they'll do anything to stop you. But we can't let them. You've got to stay strong." "I'm not scared for me," Chloe said, her voice steady despite the panic inside her. "But if something happens to my mom..." Emma grabbed her by the shoulders. "We're not going to let that happen. You've got people on your side now. We're going to fight this, but you need to be careful. Don't let them isolate you." Chloe nodded, knowing Emma was right. But the weight of the threats, of the people trying to silence her, felt heavier now. The fear was no longer a distant possibility. It was real. As the days went by, Chloe's fears grew more tangible. She made sure her mother had extra security, arranging for a neighbor to keep an eye on her when Chloe couldn't be there. But no matter what precautions she took, the anxiety gnawed at her, creeping into every moment of her day. Then came the phone call. Chloe answered it quickly, her heart in her throat, only to hear the voice of Detective Taylor. It was a voice she never wanted to hear again. "You've made a big mistake, Miss Adams," the detective said, his tone cold and calculated. "This is beyond your control now. It's bigger than you think." Chloe's stomach twisted. "What do you want?" "It's not about what I want. It's about what's coming for you," he replied, his voice laced with a subtle threat. "You think you're going to change the system? The people you're dealing with are not interested in your little rebellion. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." Chloe gritted her teeth. "You don't scare me, detective. I'm not going anywhere. You can't intimidate me into silence." A pause, followed by a dry laugh. "I'm not the one you should be worried about." Before Chloe could respond, the line went dead. She stood there, her heart pounding, her hand gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had been prepared for this, she knew the threats were only going to escalate. But the coldness of the detective's words sent a shiver down her spine. "Who is he working for?" Emma asked, coming up behind Chloe and seeing the look on her face. Chloe didn't answer right away. The uncertainty was overwhelming. She had already suspected that the system was trying to silence her, but now it felt like everything was closing in on her from every side. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She could feel the walls closing in, but there was no way out. No matter how hard she tried to push through, the forces against her were too strong, too pervasive. The pressure of the situation was suffocating, and Chloe wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it together. But she wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. Too much was at stake now, and Chloe knew she couldn't let them win. Not when everything was finally starting to change. She took a deep breath and put the phone down. "I'm not afraid of them," she said quietly. "And I won't stop. Not now. Not ever." Emma nodded firmly. "We won't stop either. We're in this together." They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging over them. Chloe's mind raced, but in that moment, she knew something more important than fear was taking hold of her: resolve. The battle was far from over. But Chloe was done running. The silence was deafening, but Chloe knew it was only temporary. The storm was coming, and it was going to hit hard. The next few days passed in a haze of relentless pressure and anticipation. Chloe's phone buzzed non-stop with messages, some from allies offering support, others from strangers accusing her of stirring up trouble. Yet there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. The threats against her family, the unsettling calls from Detective Taylor, the increasing tension, it was all building to something monumental. Chloe could feel it. The air around her was thick with unease, as though the entire city was holding its breath. And as the clock ticked on, the feeling of impending conflict grew stronger. But still, no one knew exactly when or how it would happen. She spent her days immersed in the case, reading through documents, drafting speeches, meeting with her lawyer, and trying to push through the fog of fear that seemed to cloud every thought. But even in her most focused moments, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling at the back of her mind. They were waiting for her to make a mistake. One slip up, and they would pounce. The phone calls kept coming, and the threats escalated. Every time Chloe thought she had a handle on things, something else happened. A new email arrived with another warning, an anonymous tip-off about her family's location, or an insinuating comment from someone she thought she could trust. She had to remind herself constantly that she was playing a dangerous game, one where even the smallest misstep could cost her everything. But it was Emma who finally broke the silence. They were sitting in Chloe's living room one evening, the weight of the world hanging heavy between them. Emma, normally so composed, looked uncharacteristically uneasy. She shifted in her seat, her eyes avoiding Chloe's as she spoke. "Chloe, There's something I think you need to know, Emma began slowly, her voice tight. Chloe raised an eyebrow. What is it? Emma hesitated before finally meeting Chloe's gaze. It's about the detective, and his connections. Chloe's stomach churned. What do you mean? There's a lot more to him than you realize. Taylor's not just some ordinary cop. He's connected to people in higher places, people you don't want to mess with, Emma said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And I've been looking into it. He's been using his position to intimidate and silence people for years. Chloe's pulse quickened. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it from Emma made it feel far too real. Are you telling me that he's not just a cop, but a part of something bigger? Emma nodded, her expression dark. Exactly. He's part of a network that goes deep, deep into the system you're trying to fight. And I think he's been using you as a pawn in a much larger game. Chloe felt the floor shift beneath her. This was no longer just about the case, no longer just about the injustice she had experienced. This was about corruption. A force far more dangerous than anything she had prepared for. We have to expose him, Chloe said, the words coming out like a final decision. We have to take this all the way. Emma's eyes flickered with concern. You're not thinking about taking them down yourself, are you? Chloe shook her head, the determination in her eyes sharper than ever. No. But I'm not going to sit around and wait for them to strike. We need to expose everything. All of it. It was a dangerous decision, but Chloe knew there was no turning back now. She had come too far to let fear control her. And if the system was as rotten as Emma suspected, then it had to be exposed, no matter what the cost. As Chloe made her plans, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a razor's edge. The storm was coming, and the more she fought back, the more violent it would become. But Chloe didn't flinch. She knew what was at stake, and she was prepared to face whatever was thrown her way. The battle was no longer about just one person's fight for justice, it was about exposing a system that had been broken for far too long. That night, Chloe lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the rush of thoughts racing through her mind. The quiet before the storm felt suffocating, but she knew that silence would not last. The fight was about to get even more dangerous. But Chloe was ready. The storm was coming. The first move had been made, and now the game was in full swing, there was no turning back, only forward into the chaos. The days blurred into one another. The pressure was constant, relentless. Chloe barely had time to sleep, let alone think. She spent her nights poring over every detail, strategizing, and working with Emma to find a way to bring Detective Taylor's corruption to light. It was exhausting, but Chloe felt more driven than ever. Her phone rang more frequently now, each call feeling like a countdown to something inevitable. Some were from her supporters, others from anonymous numbers, their voices barely a whisper, warning her to stop what she was doing. But Chloe had never been one to back down. She refused to be intimidated, refused to allow the forces of corruption to dictate her life any longer. But things were shifting. The world around her was changing in subtle, insidious ways. People she had once trusted seemed to be distancing themselves, eyes avoiding hers, words becoming less certain. It was clear that word had spread about her actions. The closer Chloe got to uncovering the truth, the more enemies she made. And now, those enemies were closing in. It was the day after the meeting with her lawyer that the first real blow came. Chloe had just finished a strategy session when she received an encrypted email, its subject line short but chilling, "They know." Her heart raced as she opened it, each word sinking deeper into her chest. The email was brief, outlining an anonymous tip-off about her next move. Someone had been watching her. Someone who knew exactly what she was planning. Chloe's mind raced. She had been careful, so careful. How could they have known? She stared at the message for a long time, trying to make sense of it. But before she could take another breath, her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Emma. Chloe, meet me at the office. We need to talk. Now. Chloe grabbed her coat, her pulse pounding as she rushed out the door. Her mind whirled with possibilities. Had someone close to her betrayed her? Or was it Taylor, using his connections to track her every move? As she arrived at the office, Chloe found Emma standing near the back, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Chloe, they know everything," Emma said, voice shaking. "There's no more time. You have to leave. Now." Chloe didn't need to ask who they were. She already knew. It was Detective Taylor's network, the ones who had been watching her every step. The people she was up against were more powerful, more connected, than she had ever realized. "We need to go public," Chloe said firmly. "If we can expose Taylor now, it'll be over. He won't have time to cover his tracks." Emma shook her head. "It's too late for that. If you do that, they'll kill you." "I'm serious, Chloe, they'll kill you, and they'll make sure no one ever finds out." Chloe clenched her fists, a surge of anger rising in her chest. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had come so far. There was no way she could back down now. But Emma was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than she had ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than she had ever thought possible. She was up against a system, a machine that could destroy everything she had worked for with a single, ruthless move. Chloe's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with an incoming call. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her it wasn't good news. "Hello?" Chloe answered, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "This is Detective Taylor," the voice on the other end said, smooth and cold. "I hope you've been enjoying the game, Miss Parker. But I think it's time we ended this little charade." Chloe's stomach dropped. She didn't respond right away, the silence hanging heavy in the air. "I'm not afraid of you, Taylor," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with a fierce resolve. The voice on the other end chuckled, low and threatening. "I think you should be. But let's make a deal, shall we? You stop digging into things that don't concern you, and we'll let you walk away. You can go back to your life, pretend you never saw anything. The choice is yours." Chloe's mind raced, every part of her screaming to fight back. But deep down, she knew what the consequences of defying him could be. "I'll never stop. Not until the truth comes out," she said, her voice unwavering. There was a pause on the line, and then the voice came back, colder than before. "I hope you're prepared for what happens next. You won't have much time to reconsider." The line went dead. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. This was it. The final countdown had begun. Taylor wasn't just playing games anymore, he was making it personal. The danger had never felt more real. "Chloe," Emma said, her voice shaking as she looked at her. "You have to run. Now. They'll come for you." Chloe didn't move at first. Her mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. But deep down, she knew Emma was right. The storm had already broken, and there was no way to stop it now. But Chloe wasn't ready to run. Not yet. "I'm not backing down," Chloe said, her voice firm. "It's time to end this. Once and for all." The game was on. The storm had arrived, and there was no turning back now. Everything Chloe had worked for, fought for, was about to come to a head in a way she never imagined. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as she paced back and forth in her small office. The phone call from Detective Taylor replayed in her mind over and over again. The threat had been clear. They were coming for her. But instead of fear, all she felt was a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption that had tainted the very system that was supposed to protect people. It was about something bigger, something that had the power to change everything. Chloe couldn't walk away now, not when she was so close. She had come too far. "Chloe," Emma said, her voice laced with concern as she entered the office. "You're not thinking of going after them alone, are you? This is getting too dangerous. We need to call for backup." Chloe stopped pacing and turned to face her, her jaw set, her resolve unwavering. "I don't have time for backup. The longer we wait, the more ground they gain. We need to act now, before they come for us. Before they bury the truth." Emma's eyes were wide with fear, but Chloe saw something else there too. Underneath the worry, there was something like admiration, or perhaps disbelief. Chloe was determined, even if it meant risking everything. "I have a plan," Chloe said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been gathering everything we need, every scrap of evidence, every connection. It's all here." She motioned to the stack of documents on her desk, the results of months of relentless work. Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Chloe glanced at the clock on the wall, her pulse quickening. Time was running out. "I need you to set up a meeting. Get the press involved. We're going public, tonight." Emma's eyes widened. "Chloe, are you out of your mind? If Taylor finds out—" "I'm done hiding," Chloe interrupted, her voice hardening. "I've been running for too long. It's time they knew who they're up against." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Emma took a deep breath, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "All right. I'll make the calls." As Emma left to arrange the meeting, Chloe sat down at her desk, staring at the file in front of her. The evidence was overwhelming: corruption, manipulation, abuse of power. Detective Taylor had been running the game for far too long. He thought he could control everything, but Chloe had one final card to play. She'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for the right time to strike. And now it was here. The next few hours passed in a blur. Chloe barely had time to think as she focused on the final preparations. Emma returned with a list of journalists willing to cover the story, and the tension in the air grew as they worked together to craft their message. By the time the evening came, everything was in place. The press conference was set, the evidence ready to be revealed. Chloe felt a cold determination settle in her chest as she prepared for what was about to unfold. But deep down, she knew this wouldn't be easy. Taylor would fight back, and he would stop at nothing to maintain his grip on the city. Chloe had no illusions about what would happen next. The stakes were higher than ever, and the final confrontation was fast approaching. The press conference began. Journalists filed into the room, their cameras flashing as Chloe took the stage. The crowd quieted as she stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, waiting for her to speak. She cleared her throat, her voice steady. "Thank you for being here today. My name is Chloe Parker, and I'm here to expose the corruption that has been running rampant in our city." The room was silent, the tension thick in the air. "I've spent months investigating a powerful figure within our police department," Chloe continued, her voice rising with each word. "A man who has been using his position to destroy lives, manipulate justice, and hide his crimes under the guise of authority. A man who believes he is untouchable. That man is Detective Taylor." A collective gasp rippled through the room as Chloe laid out the evidence: photos, documents, witness testimonies. Each piece was like a nail in Taylor's coffin. The journalists scribbled notes, the cameras capturing every word. But Chloe wasn't done. She had one last piece of the puzzle to reveal, the key that would unravel everything. "And now," she said, her voice growing louder, "I have the proof that Taylor is not working alone. He has connections that go all the way to the top. And if we don't act now, if we don't hold him accountable, this city will continue to suffer under his reign of fear." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the questions began, rapid and sharp, as the journalists pushed forward to learn more. Chloe answered every one, her confidence growing with each revelation. But just as things seemed to be going in her favor, Chloe's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her heart sinking as she saw the message. "We have someone you care about. If you want them to stay safe, you'll stop this." The world seemed to stop spinning as Chloe read the message again, panic rising in her chest. Her mind raced, the weight of the threat sinking in. They had someone she loved. Someone important. But Chloe knew what she had to do. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She turned to the journalists in the room, her eyes steely with determination. "This story doesn't end here," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're just getting started. And we won't stop until the truth is revealed." The final move had been made. Now, the game would end. The message was clear, someone Chloe loved was in danger. But it wasn't fear that gripped her now. It was rage, a fire that burned hotter than anything she had ever known. The press conference room was a blur of flashing lights and rapid-fire questions, but Chloe's mind wasn't on the reporters. Her thoughts raced, focused on the chilling message she had just received. Someone she cared about was in danger, and that someone was the key to bringing everything she had worked for to fruition. She scanned the room, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the podium. Emma, sitting at the back, met her eyes with a look of pure concern, but Chloe couldn't let herself falter. She had to keep her composure. She had to finish what she started. Chloe excused herself from the stage, her voice steady as she addressed the reporters. "I'm sorry, but I need to make an urgent call. Please, stay tuned." She walked off the stage, her mind reeling as she moved quickly to a side room. The message from the unknown number blinked on her phone again. The words felt like a physical blow. "We have someone you care about. If you want them to stay safe, you'll stop this. Or else." Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as she dialed Emma. She needed to warn her, to make sure she was safe. "Chloe. What's going on?" Emma's voice was tight with concern. "They have someone," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who, but they're threatening them to get me to stop. Emma, I can't pull back now. We're too close. Chloe, this is getting dangerous. We can't let them take anyone else from us. We need to figure out who's behind this," Emma replied, her voice strained. "I know," Chloe muttered, her fingers gripping the phone tighter. "But right now, I need to focus. Stay where you are, don't move. I'm going to finish this. Just trust me." She hung up without waiting for a response, her thoughts now spinning in 100 different directions. She had to act, and fast. She couldn't let the threat distract her. She'd faced worse, hadn't she? She had come up against enemies more powerful than she could ever have imagined, and still she kept going. She wouldn't stop now. Chloe walked out of the side room and back into the press conference, her expression calm, but her mind a storm. The journalists looked at her with expectant eyes, waiting for her next words. But she was no longer the woman they had seen moments ago, she was something else now. This was war. "You've heard my story," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But what you don't know is the full extent of the corruption at play. This isn't just about one man. This is about an entire system that has failed the people it was meant to protect. This is about a network of power that spans every level, from the police to the city government." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She could see the journalists scribbling frantically, trying to keep up. This city has been controlled by people who think they're untouchable. People who have been stealing from the people they were supposed to serve. And Detective Taylor? He's just the beginning, she continued. I have proof. Evidence that shows the connections, the deals, the manipulation. And I'm not backing down. Her voice rang out, stronger than before. She was done being afraid. Done hiding in the shadows. Tomorrow morning, this will hit the news, and the whole city will know the truth. No more lies. No more cover-ups. This is the beginning of the end. As Chloe spoke, the door to the back of the room creaked open. Emma stepped inside, her face pale. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. They've taken someone, haven't they? Chloe asked, though she already knew the answer. Emma nodded grimly. They have your brother, Nathan. They've got him. Chloe's stomach dropped. Nathan. Her little brother. The person she had promised to protect all these years. She had no idea how they had gotten to him, but she didn't have time to figure that out now. All that mattered was getting him back. Chloe's jaw clenched with anger. They made a mistake. They think they can use him to make me stop. But they don't know who they're dealing with. Emma took a step toward her, her expression filled with worry. Chloe, we can't do this alone. You need to tell the police. You need to. No, Chloe cut her off, her voice firm. The police are part of this. If we go to them now, Nathan will be lost. I'm going in alone. I'm getting him back. Emma shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. Chloe, please. You can't do this by yourself. But Chloe was already moving. I have to, she said, her voice cold. I'm not giving them Nathan. I won't let them win. She grabbed her coat, her resolve stealing as she stormed toward the exit. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, dark and oppressive. But Chloe was done with fear. This was her city, her fight, and no one was taking it from her. As she stepped into the night, a single thought echoed in her mind. This ends now. There was no turning back. Chloe stood at the edge of the abandoned warehouse, the cold air biting at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire that burned inside her. Nothing was going to stop her from getting Nathan back. Chloe's pulse raced as she stood before the dilapidated warehouse, the faint hum of the city in the distance barely reaching her ears. The building loomed in front of her like a dark, forgotten monument to everything that had gone wrong in her life. She knew they were inside. The people who thought they could break her, who thought they could use her brother to bend her will. But Chloe wasn't that woman anymore. She was stronger now, more focused, more dangerous. She had been pushed too far, and this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the reckoning. She checked the gun tucked beneath her coat, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She had never wanted to carry a weapon, but desperate times called for desperate measures. They had Nathan. They'd crossed a line that Chloe wasn't willing to forgive. She signaled to Emma, who had followed her from the press conference but remained hidden in the shadows, her nerves evident. Stay back, Chloe said in a low voice. If anything goes wrong, you'll need to be ready to help me get out of here. I won't leave you, Emma replied, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. I'm here, Chloe. We do this together. Chloe nodded, appreciating Emma's loyalty, but her eyes hardened with determination. This is my fight now. With a deep breath, Chloe crept toward the side of the warehouse, her boots silent on the cracked concrete. She wasn't sure how many of them were inside, but she had a plan. She had to get Nathan out of there before they realized she was coming. Peering through a broken window, Chloe spotted movement. Inside, a few men were gathered around a table, their voices low and harsh. From what she could hear, they were discussing the next steps, planning how to deal with her once she'd been forced to back off. Chloe Thompson doesn't know when to quit, one of them grunted, his words a twisted mockery of everything she had fought for. She's making this personal. But we can make her break. We just need to keep her in line, one more step, and she'll fall. Chloe's blood boiled at the mention of her name, but she forced herself to stay calm. The warehouse wasn't just a hideout. It was a trap, and she knew it. They wanted her to charge in, to make a mistake. But she wouldn't. She'd be smarter than they were. She pulled her phone from her pocket and texted Emma, ready for backup. Wait for the signal. With the plan in motion, Chloe moved toward the back door. She had no intention of playing by their rules, no intention of giving them the satisfaction of a fight. She would take them by surprise. It was the only way. Inside the warehouse, Nathan was bound to a chair, his face pale, but his eyes alive with fear and something else, defiance. He had always been the brave one, the one who never backed down from a fight. Chloe's heart tightened at the sight of him, but there was no time to waste. She needed to be quick. She reached for the door handle, her breath steady as she prepared to make her move. Just as she was about to turn the handle, a loud bang sounded from behind her. The men had heard something. Chloe's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She kicked open the door with force, the element of surprise on her side. The men inside turned in shock as Chloe entered, her movements swift and precise. She pulled the gun from beneath her coat and pointed it directly at the closest man. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice cold and commanding. The room fell silent for a split second before chaos erupted. One of the men lunged toward her, but she fired a warning shot into the air, the sound deafening in the small space. "I said don't move." The men froze, their eyes darting between Chloe and the weapon in her hand. Chloe's grip tightened on the gun, her focus laser-sharp. She had no intention of killing anyone, this was about getting Nathan out, not bloodshed, but she wouldn't hesitate if they tried to stop her. "Nathan!" Chloe called, her voice urgent. Her brother's eyes locked onto hers, relief flooding his features. "Chloe, you came." His voice was hoarse, but he managed a weak smile. "I knew you would." Chloe didn't smile back. "Hang tight. I'm getting you out of here." She moved toward him, her gun still aimed at the men who were slowly backing away. The one who had spoken earlier, the one who thought they had the upper hand, was now visibly shaken. "You should have listened, Chloe," he sneered. "You can't win this. You're just one person." Chloe narrowed her eyes. "I'm not just one person," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm the person who's going to destroy everything you've built. And I'm starting with you." With a swift motion, Chloe cut Nathan's restraints, helping him stand. He was weak, but he managed to support himself. "Let's go," she said urgently, grabbing his arm. "Chloe, they're going to follow us," Emma's voice came from the doorway. "We need to move now." Chloe turned to see Emma standing in the entrance, her face pale but determined. The backup had arrived. Nathan, still shaky, nodded. "Go. I'm with you." Chloe, her gun still trained on the men, took a step toward the door, but before they could make it out, one of the men lunged, reaching for a nearby gun. Chloe reacted instinctively, shooting the weapon out of his hand. The man cried out in pain, his arm falling limp to his side. "You're done," Chloe said coldly, stepping over him. "All of you. The game's over." With Nathan at her side and Emma covering their backs, Chloe led them out of the warehouse. They didn't look back. As they stepped into the night, Chloe's heart beat with a new kind of purpose. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. This was about taking down the people who had spent too long thinking they could get away with anything. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The battle had just begun. Chloe couldn't breathe as she stepped into the conference room, the weight of everything she had fought for pressing down on her shoulders. This was the moment that would change everything. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Chloe stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the faces of the men and women seated around the table. Her heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline from the rescue still coursing through her veins. Nathan was safe now, but the war wasn't over. This was it, the showdown. The confrontation that would bring everything into the light. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, and for a moment, no one spoke. The people in the room knew who she was, knew what she had just pulled off. They knew that if she was here, it wasn't for pleasantries. Ms. Thompson, a voice broke the silence. It was Alan Fraser, the head of the board. He was a tall, imposing figure, his sharp features and grey hair giving him an air of authority. But there was something in his eyes, something guarded, something uncertain. "You have no business being here," he said, his voice cool, though there was a flicker of doubt in his gaze. Chloe's eyes narrowed, but she held her ground. "I have every right to be here," she replied, her tone steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "You've all underestimated me for far too long, and now it's time for the truth to come out." The room shifted uncomfortably as Chloe stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Alan's. "You think you can control everything. You think you can control the narrative, manipulate the truth, and make people believe whatever you want. But I'm done playing along." Alan scoffed. "You don't understand the gravity of the situation, Chloe. You think you're some kind of hero, but all you're doing is throwing everything you've worked for down the drain." Chloe's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. "No, Alan. I'm exposing the people who have been hiding behind lies. People like you." The room fell into an eerie silence. Everyone knew what she was talking about. They knew the things that had been covered up, the secrets, the scandals, the corruption that had been buried for years. But no one had been brave enough to bring it all to light. Until now. Emma, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward, her presence a silent support for Chloe. She had been by her side through everything, and now she was part of the plan, too. "It's over, Alan. This is the end of your reign. It's time for the truth." Alan's face flushed with anger. "You think you can just walk in here and tear everything apart? You're making a huge mistake, Chloe. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Chloe shot back, her voice unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of you." At that moment, Chloe pulled out a thick file from her bag and slammed it onto the table. The room was so quiet you could hear the rustling of papers as Chloe flipped it open, revealing documents, photos, and a series of confidential files. "This is it," Chloe said, her voice steady, but with the weight of all that had come before it. "This is the evidence that ties you to every illegal deal, every dirty transaction, every lie you've fed the public. It's all here." The faces around the table paled as they saw the contents. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment she had been building up to, the moment everything would change. "You've been using your position to manipulate people, to cover up crimes, and to push forward an agenda that's only served your interests," Chloe continued, her eyes burning with fury. "But no more. The truth is out, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Alan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You have no idea what you're doing, Chloe. These people, these allies, you're destroying your career. They will never let you walk away from this." "They won't have a choice," Chloe replied, her gaze cold and unyielding. "You've all underestimated me. I'm not afraid of losing what I've built. Not anymore. What I've done, what I've learned, has to be shared. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than any one of you." Emma stepped beside Chloe, her presence a silent but powerful statement. "This isn't just about Chloe," she said. "It's about all the people you've hurt, the people you've used. This is about accountability." Chloe felt the fire in her chest ignite again. The walls were closing in on Alan and his people, and they knew it. Chloe could see the fear in their eyes now, fear of exposure, fear of losing control. Alan looked to his left and right, silently gauging the support of his colleagues, but it was clear they were wavering. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was out, and there was no way to stop it now. Chloe took a deep breath. "I'm not going to let you get away with this. The world will know who you really are." She turned and headed toward the door, Nathan's hand resting firmly on her shoulder. He had been through so much, but he was standing tall now, his strength a reflection of everything Chloe had done for him. Emma followed closely behind, her footsteps a steady rhythm of solidarity. As Chloe opened the door and stepped into the hallway, she didn't look back. The battle had been long, but they had won. And in the end, the truth had triumphed. The war wasn't over, but this was a victory that would ripple through everything. The lies had been shattered. And nothing would ever be the same again. The truth had finally been unveiled. The aftermath of the storm was never what Chloe had expected. Victory, yes, but at what cost? The world outside the conference room felt like a distant echo. Chloe stood in the hallway, her heart still racing, the adrenaline slowly draining from her system. Nathan, Emma, and the others who had helped her in the fight gathered around her, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had succeeded in exposing the truth, but there was no true sense of victory, at least not yet. The press had already begun to swarm, their questions flooding the airwaves as Chloe stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her shoulders. "Chloe! Over here! Can we get a statement?" reporters shouted, their cameras flashing like a barrage of lightning. She hadn't expected it to be like this, but she knew the media would be relentless. They always were, especially when it came to a story like this, one that could shatter so many lives. Chloe raised her hand, signaling for the crowd to give her a moment. She glanced at Nathan, who stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. He had been with her from the beginning, and now, in this moment, their bond was stronger than ever. "You know what to do," Chloe whispered to him. Nathan nodded, his expression determined. "I've got your back." Turning toward the reporters, Chloe took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had exposed corruption and lies, but now she had to face the world's scrutiny. This was only the beginning, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges, legal battles, public backlash, and the ever-present pressure of being in the spotlight. But Chloe was ready. She had been ready for this moment for far too long. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the overwhelming chaos around her. "You've heard the truth. You've seen the evidence. What happens next is not just about me, it's about everyone who has been affected by the corruption I've uncovered. It's about accountability. It's about justice." Her eyes swept across the crowd, her gaze unwavering. "I won't stop until every last one of the people responsible is held accountable for their actions. This is not the end, it's only the beginning." Chloe's words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence, deep, palpable silence. The reporters were caught off guard by the conviction in her voice. They had expected a tearful statement, a moment of weakness, but what they saw was someone who had found her strength, someone who was no longer afraid. Nathan stepped forward, his arm around Chloe's shoulders, offering a quiet sense of reassurance. He knew how much this had cost her, how much she had given to get to this point. But he also knew that Chloe wasn't going to back down. Not now. As the reporters fired more questions, Chloe stepped into the spotlight, her voice rising above the noise. "You all want to know what happens next. The truth is, I don't have all the answers. But I do know this, the truth will always come out. The fight for justice will continue." The press conference continued for what felt like hours. Chloe fielded questions with unwavering resolve, her answers sharp and measured. She had nothing left to hide, no secrets to keep. This was her moment, and she would not let it slip away. When it was finally over, Chloe and Nathan retreated into the privacy of her office, the weight of the day's events beginning to sink in. "You did it," Nathan said quietly, his voice filled with pride. Chloe sank into the chair behind her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she ran them through her hair. "We did it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Nathan smiled softly, sitting across from her. "You were always going to win, Chloe. I just helped you make it happen." She nodded, her mind racing with the reality of what had just transpired. The fight was far from over. There would be more battles to face, more enemies to confront, but Chloe wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she was determined to see it through. As the hours passed and the sun began to set, Chloe reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the sleepless nights, the endless hurdles, the sacrifices she had made. She had fought not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been oppressed by the system. She had fought for the truth, and now, the world knew what had been hidden for so long. But even in the midst of her victory, Chloe knew the hard work was just beginning. The legal battles ahead would be grueling, the media would continue to pry into her personal life, and the people who had been exposed would not go down without a fight. Yet, Chloe was resolute. She had faced the darkest of days, and she had emerged stronger because of it. She knew that nothing worth fighting for came easy. But now, with the truth in her corner, she was ready for whatever came next. The war wasn't over. But Chloe Thompson was no longer the same woman who had walked into this battle. She had become something more, someone who would stand tall, no matter the cost. The journey had only just begun. And Chloe was ready to fight for justice, no matter what. They thought it was over, but for Chloe Thompson, this was only the beginning of a much harder fight. Chloe sat at her desk in the days following the press conference, the weight of the battle still lingering in the air. The news outlets had covered the scandal extensively, the stories swirling with dramatic twists and sensational headlines. Public opinion was divided, some hailed her as a hero, while others condemned her for bringing the ugly truth into the open. But it didn't matter. Chloe knew what she had to do. The path ahead was uncertain, and the storm wasn't over. The people she had exposed, those at the top of the political and corporate ladders, weren't going to go down quietly. They had money, power, and influence, and Chloe knew they wouldn't hesitate to use them to bury the truth. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Nathan, "We need to talk. There's something you should know." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. Nathan had been her rock through all of this, and if he was concerned, it could only mean one thing: things were about to get even harder. She grabbed her coat and headed out the door, meeting Nathan in the small conference room on the third floor of the building. His face was tense, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an air of urgency. "What's going on?" Chloe asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Nathan glanced at the door, making sure no one else was listening. Then, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a leak. Someone's been feeding information to the people we exposed. They know more than we thought. And it's getting dangerous." Chloe's stomach sank. She had expected backlash, but not like this. She had always known that revealing the truth would put her in the crosshairs of powerful people, but now it seemed like the stakes were higher than ever. "Who's doing this?" Chloe asked, her fists clenched at her sides. Nathan shook his head. "We don't know yet, but it's someone on the inside. We've got a mole." Chloe's mind raced. She had trusted everyone on her team, but now, she realized, she couldn't afford to trust anyone blindly. She had to be smarter than that. The clock was ticking, and the people she was up against would stop at nothing to silence her. "We need to find out who it is," Chloe said, her voice determined. "And we need to make sure they can't use this against us." Nathan nodded. "I'm already working on it. But we need to be careful. The more we push, the more they'll fight back. They're not going to just let this go." The conversation shifted, and they began to map out a strategy to safeguard their position. Chloe knew she couldn't afford to back down, not now. There were too many lives at stake, too much that needed to be exposed. As Nathan left to gather information, Chloe remained in the conference room, staring out the window at the city skyline. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly. But underneath the calm, she knew a storm was brewing. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, and Chloe had no illusions about what it would take to survive. She had to be relentless. She had to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, and continue to push forward, no matter how hard it got. Suddenly, her phone rang, the number unrecognized. Chloe hesitated before answering, her pulse quickening as she brought the phone to her ear. "Chloe Thompson," a gruff voice on the other end asked. "Yes," Chloe replied, her tone steady, though her heart raced. "I think you should know that we're watching you. Every step you take. You think you've won, but you haven't seen anything yet." The line went dead, leaving Chloe staring at the phone, her mind spinning. It wasn't just the media that was after her. It was the people in the shadows, those who pulled the strings from behind the scenes. Chloe had been prepared for the fight. But now, it was clear that the stakes had just been raised. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her life. The room seemed to close in on her as the weight of the threat pressed down on her chest. But Chloe wasn't the type to be intimidated. She had fought too hard to get here, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her now. She took a deep breath, setting the phone down. It was time to get back to work. There was a mole to find, and she would find them, before they could strike first. As the day wore on, Chloe met with her closest allies, each of them contributing to the plan to uncover the leak. They worked late into the night, poring over data, tracing phone calls, and connecting dots that seemed impossible to connect. It was a race against time. In the end, Chloe knew one thing for sure: she was not going to back down. She had come too far, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much. The people who thought they could intimidate her were gravely mistaken. The fight had only just begun. And Chloe Thompson was ready to face whatever came next. What Chloe didn't expect was that the true danger wasn't the enemy in front of her, but the one waiting in the shadows. The days blurred together as Chloe immersed herself in the relentless pursuit of the truth. Every phone call, every meeting felt like a calculated move in a game she hadn't fully understood when she first entered. The stress was beginning to show, dark circles under her eyes, a tightness in her shoulders, but Chloe pushed through, refusing to let her exhaustion show. Nathan was working overtime too, tracing the leak within their team, but they had found nothing solid yet. Every lead they followed turned into a dead end. It was becoming clear: they were being outmaneuvered. One late evening, as Chloe sat at her desk, going through a new round of evidence, a knock on her office door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, already expecting it to be Nathan. To her surprise, it was Erica, the journalist who had been helping her cover the scandal. Erica's face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. "Chloe, we have a problem," Erica said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind her. Chloe immediately stood, sensing the seriousness in Erica's voice. "What's going on?" Erica looked over her shoulder, as if making sure no one was listening, before lowering her voice. "I got a tip. Someone from your side, they know you're onto them. And they've made it clear that if you keep digging, they'll take you down, no matter what it takes." Chloe's stomach churned. "What do you mean, take me down?" Erica swallowed hard. "They're threatening to expose things about your past. They've got files on you, Chloe. Files no one else has seen. They're warning you to back off, or they'll ruin you." The words hit Chloe like a punch to the gut. Her past, those hidden corners of her life that she had worked so hard to bury, to keep in the past, were suddenly being dragged back into the light. She steadied herself, refusing to show fear. "What kind of files?" Erica shook her head. "I don't know. I couldn't get specifics. But they said it's enough to destroy your career, your reputation, everything." Chloe took a deep breath, trying to suppress the surge of panic threatening to overwhelm her. She had worked too hard for this. She couldn't let them intimidate her now. But she couldn't deny the truth. If they had something, anything, from her past, it could destroy her. She had enemies. Powerful ones. "I need to know who's behind this," Chloe said, her voice low and fierce. "I'm not backing down. But I need to know who I'm up against." Erica hesitated. "I'll try to find out more. But be careful, Chloe. Whoever they are, they're not playing fair. Chloe watched Erica leave, her mind racing. She knew the risks. But something inside her wouldn't allow her to walk away now. The people she had exposed had their claws in every corner of the system. But she had one advantage: they didn't know her like she knew them. She would fight dirty if she had to. The next day, Chloe met with her most trusted allies, Nathan, Erica, and a few key members of her team. Together, they went over every possible angle, trying to figure out who could have the resources to go after her so aggressively. But still, they found nothing concrete. As the meeting broke up, Chloe took a quiet moment to herself in her office. She stared out the window at the city below, her mind in turmoil. The threats were real, and the stakes had never been higher. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Nathan: "I've got something." Her heart raced as she quickly typed back, "What is it?" His reply came seconds later: "Meet me. I think I know who's been feeding them information." Chloe grabbed her jacket and rushed to the parking garage, where Nathan was waiting by his car. He didn't waste any time. "I've traced the leak," Nathan said, as soon as Chloe approached. "It's someone we never expected, someone close to you." Chloe's pulse quickened. "Who?" Nathan hesitated for a moment before speaking the name that made Chloe's blood run cold. "Your assistant. Vanessa." Chloe recoiled in shock. Vanessa had been a loyal member of her team, someone who had worked alongside her for years. They had shared countless late nights working on stories, forging a bond of trust that Chloe had never questioned. "How could you possibly be sure?" Chloe demanded, her mind racing. Nathan pulled out his phone and showed her a series of encrypted messages from Vanessa's account to an anonymous contact, detailing key pieces of information about Chloe's investigation. The messages were clear: someone had been feeding Chloe's every move directly to the enemy. Chloe felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Vanessa. It didn't make sense. "I don't know what to say," Chloe muttered, the betrayal sinking in. "I trusted her." Nathan looked grim. "You have to face it, Chloe. This is bigger than we thought. They've infiltrated everything. And they're coming for you. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" Chloe stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She couldn't let Vanessa get away with this, not after everything they had been through. But exposing Vanessa could destroy the trust of everyone else on her team. It would mean ripping apart everything she had worked for. But there was no choice. The truth had to come out. With a sharp breath, Chloe looked up at Nathan. "We're going after her. But we do it carefully. I want to hear her side. I want to know why she did this." Nathan nodded, his expression hardening. "We'll handle it. But Chloe, we need to act fast. If they know we're onto them, they'll go after you harder." Chloe nodded, determination flooding her veins. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. This was a fight for survival. And she would do whatever it took to expose the truth, no matter who it hurt. The storm was far from over. But Chloe wasn't going down without a fight. Chloe never thought she would be the one to confront her former ally, but now, she had no choice but to face the betrayal head-on. The air in the room felt thick as Chloe stared at Vanessa, who stood across from her, her eyes darting nervously. The tension between them was palpable. Vanessa had always been a trusted member of Chloe's inner circle, her right hand in everything. She had watched Chloe grow from a budding journalist into a force to be reckoned with. And now, here she was, accused of betraying her, of selling out everything they had worked for. Chloe's voice broke the silence, low but firm. "Why, Vanessa?" Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Chloe's eyes. "I didn't want this, Chloe. You have to understand, I didn't have a choice." "Didn't have a choice?" Chloe echoed, her disbelief almost turning to anger. You didn't have a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to give them everything, knowing what it would cost me. Vanessa finally lifted her eyes, meeting Chloe's gaze. There was no remorse in them, just a flicker of guilt and fear. I wasn't the one who wanted this, Chloe. They threatened me, they threatened my family. You don't understand what they're capable of. Chloe felt the sting of Vanessa's words, but it only fueled the fire burning inside her. So you sold us out to protect yourself? To protect your family? I didn't want to do this, Vanessa pleaded, her voice trembling. But they told me that if I didn't help them, they would hurt the people I love. I didn't know where else to turn. Chloe took a step forward, her expression hardening. You could have come to me. You could have told me what was going on. Instead, you chose the easy way out. Vanessa flinched at the accusation. I thought I could keep both sides happy. I thought I could help you while protecting them, but I couldn't. They were watching every move I made. Chloe clenched her fists, struggling to keep her composure. Who are they, Vanessa? Who is behind all this? Vanessa hesitated, her breath shaky. I can't tell you. They made it clear that if I said anything, they'd kill me, and my family. Chloe's heart sank. The stakes were even higher than she'd imagined. Whoever was behind this wasn't just interested in destroying Chloe, they were willing to go to extreme lengths to keep their secrets buried. She pressed harder, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You have to help me, Vanessa. We need to expose them before they can hurt anyone else. You've already helped them get this far. You owe it to me, to us, to stop them now. Vanessa's face twisted in pain. I can't. I can't risk it. You don't understand how far they've gone. They've infiltrated everything, Chloe. You're not safe. None of us are. Chloe took a step back, feeling the weight of Vanessa's words. They weren't just playing games. The people she was up against weren't afraid to destroy everything and everyone in their path. They were ruthless, and they had no intention of stopping. But Chloe wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she was so close. I'll protect you, Chloe said, her voice cold with determination. If you help me bring them down, I'll make sure you and your family are safe. But you have to help me now. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, her expression torn. She looked at Chloe, then back down at the ground, as if searching for something, some way to undo the damage she had caused. I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Vanessa whispered. You've changed, Chloe. You're not the same person I used to know. I don't know if I can go down this road with you. Chloe felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. She had to stay focused. Vanessa's words were an attempt to manipulate her, to make her doubt herself. I haven't changed, Vanessa. I'm still the same person, but I'm not going to let this go. I'm going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The room fell silent, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. Chloe knew she couldn't make Vanessa change her mind. But she also knew that this conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. With one final glance at Vanessa, Chloe turned and walked out of the room. She had to keep moving. There was no time to waste. Every minute brought them closer to the truth, and every minute brought them closer to danger. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed with a message from Nathan, "We've got another lead. Meet me." Chloe didn't hesitate. She had a decision to make. She could walk away from all of this and try to live a normal life, or she could keep fighting, keep digging, and risk losing everything. She made her choice. She would fight. Chloe's heart raced as she stepped into the abandoned warehouse, knowing that this could be the final confrontation that determined everything. The message from Nathan had been clear: meet me at the warehouse on the outskirts of town. I've got something big. As Chloe made her way through the dark, eerie warehouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The building was quiet, too quiet, and the air inside felt heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay. It was a far cry from the bustling world she had once known, a world where she had the answers and the control. But now, nothing was certain. She spotted Nathan near the back, standing next to a table cluttered with files, photos, and what looked like a stack of confidential documents. He looked up as she approached, his face tense, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "You're late," Nathan said, his voice low. "Had to make sure no one was following me," Chloe replied, scanning the shadows herself. "What's this all about?" Nathan gestured to the table. "It's all here. Everything we've been working toward. The names, the connections, the secret meetings. This is how deep it goes, Chloe." Chloe walked over and flipped through the papers, her eyes darting over the information. There were dates, times, and locations, each more incriminating than the last. But it was one photograph in particular that caught her eye. It was a picture of Vanessa. And in the background, barely visible, was someone Chloe never thought she'd see again, someone from her past, someone she trusted implicitly. That's impossible," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking. She pointed to the photo. "How did you get this?" Nathan looked at her solemnly. "I've been digging, Chloe. It's not just Vanessa. There's a whole network of people you've been working with who've been feeding information to the other side." Chloe felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just betrayal, it was something far worse. "Who are they?" Chloe asked, barely able to speak. Nathan hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice grim. "It's not just a few bad apples, Chloe. It's the people at the top, the ones who are running the show. They're the ones who've been pulling the strings all along. Your biggest allies were never who you thought they were." The words hit Chloe like a punch to the gut. She felt betrayed, hollow inside, as if the ground beneath her feet had just crumbled away. But she couldn't afford to break down now. Not when they were so close. "Who?" she demanded again, her voice sharp, desperate. Nathan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're not going to like it." Chloe's pulse quickened. "Tell me." He hesitated again before dropping the bombshell. "Your father, Chloe. He's involved. He's been working with them for years." The world seemed to stop spinning. Chloe couldn't breathe. Her mind went blank. Her father. The man who had raised her, the man who had always been her rock. The man she had trusted with everything. "No," Chloe whispered, shaking her head. "No, that can't be true. He's not like them. He wouldn't." Nathan stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I'm sorry, Chloe. But this is bigger than you know. He's been covering for them, helping them. They've used him to shield themselves, to keep their operation under wraps. Everything you've been fighting for, everything you've been uncovering, it's all been a game to him." Chloe's legs felt like they might give way beneath her. She stumbled back, gripping the table for support. Her mind reeled, the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Her father. The man who had always protected her. The man she thought was on her side. But now, it was all a lie. The truth was too much to bear. "How do you know this?" Chloe asked, her voice shaking. Nathan motioned to the documents on the table. These were intercepted from their private server. "Your father's name is all over them, Chloe. The connections, the meetings, they all trace back to him." She stared at the photograph of Vanessa once more. It wasn't just betrayal from one person, it was a conspiracy. Everyone she had trusted, every ally, every mentor, had been a part of this twisted game. She had been living in the dark. Chloe looked at Nathan, her mind clearing just a little. "We need to stop this. We need to expose them before they can do any more damage." Nathan nodded, his face hard. "But we can't do it alone. They've got too many people watching. We need to be smart. If we move too quickly, we could lose everything. Chloe clenched her fists, her jaw set with determination. We'll move carefully. But we won't stop. Not now. Not ever. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Chloe took a deep breath, pulling herself together. She had no choice but to keep going. For herself. For the truth. For the people who were counting on her. But there was still one thing she needed to know. Where do we go from here? Chloe asked, her voice steady now. Nathan's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long time, Chloe saw something in his gaze that she hadn't before, a flicker of fear. The next move is dangerous, Chloe. But we have to do it. We have no other choice. The final gambit had begun. And there would be no turning back. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around her, but she had no choice but to face what was coming next. The night was still, the air thick with the weight of everything Chloe had just learned. The photograph of her father with the corrupt network was burned into her mind. She felt numb, but there was no time for weakness. She had to press forward, for her own sake and for the truth that was slipping through her fingers. Nathan had given her no assurances. He had merely outlined the danger and the choices. But Chloe wasn't about to let it all unravel now. She couldn't. She wouldn't. They met at the dimly lit cafe on the edge of town, far enough from prying eyes, but close enough to keep them from being totally out of reach. The world had felt smaller since Chloe had learned of her father's betrayal, and each new step felt like walking on fragile glass. Nathan slid into the booth, his face pale, a look of hesitation still hanging over him. Chloe didn't waste time. We can't delay anymore, she said, her voice low but sharp. If what you say is true, then the network is already in motion. They'll know what we're up to. We need to act fast. Nathan hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. The fear in his eyes made Chloe's stomach tighten. You're right, he said, almost whispering. But you have to understand, they're watching us. I've been too close to the fire, Chloe. I've been with you for too long. They know everything about us. They've been tracking every move. Chloe's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm telling you, Chloe. There's someone on the inside, someone I didn't expect. Someone I trusted. Someone, close. A sinking feeling started to rise in Chloe's chest. Who? Nathan leaned forward, his voice barely audible. Vanessa. She's not who you think she is. The words hit Chloe like a slap. She couldn't process it. Vanessa, her confidant, her partner in this fight, the one person she thought she could rely on, was working against her. The thought didn't make sense. Vanessa? No. That's impossible, Chloe muttered, shaking her head. She's been with me from the beginning. We've been through too much. I thought so too, Nathan replied, his tone grim. But when I dug into the records, when I checked the meetings and the phone logs, she's been communicating with them. She's been reporting everything. Chloe felt the ground beneath her feet give way. You're saying, she's been playing me this whole time? I'm sorry, Nathan whispered. I never wanted to tell you. But I had to. We can't trust her. She's been feeding them information. She's been feeding your father's side. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She stood up abruptly, her mind racing. She had to see it for herself. She had to confront Vanessa, to demand answers. There was no other choice. The betrayal felt like an ice pick in her chest. Nathan stood up too, blocking her path. Chloe, wait. You don't know what you're walking into. I don't care, she snapped. She's the last person I trusted. I'm going to find her. I need to know why. Why she would do this to me? Nathan grabbed her wrist, his grip tight. You don't understand. They're not just after you. This is bigger than you know. It's not just your father. They've got people at every level. You need to be careful. You're walking right into their trap. But Chloe had already made up her mind. I'll be fine. I'm not afraid of Vanessa. I'm not afraid of any of them. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the cafe, her determination propelling her forward. As she stepped out into the cold night air, her thoughts were a whirlwind. Vanessa had been the one person she could trust. The one person who had stood by her when it all started. But now, everything was in question. Every decision, every person she thought was on her side, was suddenly a potential enemy. She needed to face Vanessa. There were too many unanswered questions. And there was no time to waste. Vanessa's apartment was eerily quiet as Chloe stood at the door, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum, each beat louder than the last. The city buzzed around Chloe as she stood in front of Vanessa's apartment building, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock. She had told herself 100 times that she would be ready for this moment, that she would stay calm, that she would be prepared for whatever Vanessa had to say. But nothing, had prepared her for this confrontation. Her mind kept racing with the possibilities of what Vanessa had been involved in, why she betrayed her, and how deep the corruption ran. Was this about money? Power? Or was it something more personal? Chloe knocked, the sound sharp in the otherwise silent night. She heard footsteps approach from within, the faint click of heels on hardwood. The door opened, revealing Vanessa standing in the threshold, looking startled but trying to mask it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Chloe, what are you doing here? Vanessa asked, her voice slightly high-pitched, the uncertainty clear beneath her composed exterior. Chloe didn't waste time with pleasantries. I know, Vanessa. I know everything. Vanessa froze, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. Chloe's voice grew more forceful. You've been feeding them information. You've been working with my father's people, haven't you? Why? Why did you betray me? Vanessa's smile faltered. For a long moment, she didn't answer, and Chloe's anger flared hotter than she ever thought possible. I trusted you, Chloe spat, her words like daggers. I fought alongside you. I believed in you. Vanessa took a step back, her face crumbling with guilt, but only for a moment. Her expression hardened as she collected herself. Chloe, it wasn't what you think, she said quietly, though Chloe could hear the tension in her voice. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. Chloe crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Then tell me the truth. Tell me why you've been lying. Vanessa hesitated before she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I had no choice. I didn't think I had a choice. Chloe's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. What are you talking about? They have my family, Chloe. They've threatened my mother, my brother, if I didn't help them, they would have killed them. Chloe's anger faltered for just a moment, replaced by confusion. You're telling me you've been helping them because they threatened your family? Vanessa nodded, her eyes downcast. I'm not proud of it. But I couldn't risk their lives. I thought I could get close to you, gather information, and then I'd find a way to stop them. I thought I could protect everyone. But it got out of control. It got worse than I ever imagined. Chloe's emotions swirled within her, anger, betrayal, confusion. She didn't know what to feel anymore. She had wanted to hear an explanation, but this wasn't the one she had prepared for. She wasn't sure she could forgive Vanessa, but part of her understood the fear she had been under. So you've been playing both sides? Chloe's voice cracked with disbelief. You've been working for them, while pretending to be on my side? I never wanted it to be like this, Vanessa pleaded. But when I found out who your father really was, I couldn't back out. I thought I could bring them down from the inside. I thought I could make a difference. But I was wrong. Chloe felt the weight of the words pressing on her chest. You betrayed me, Vanessa. You betrayed my trust. And now you're asking me to believe that you had no choice. Vanessa shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve anything. But Chloe, please, there's still time. We can stop them together. We can fix this, but only if you help me. Chloe took a step back, her mind spinning. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the cost of the truth was too much to bear. She didn't know if she could trust Vanessa anymore. She didn't know if she could trust anyone. For a long moment, the room was filled with silence, the air thick with the tension of unspoken words. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice steady but cold. I don't know what to believe anymore, Vanessa. But if you're serious about stopping this, you'd better prove it. Vanessa's face lit up with a mixture of relief and desperation. I will. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. Chloe nodded, her mind made up. She didn't have time for trust, there were bigger things at stake now. And if Vanessa was telling the truth, she'd need all the help she could get. But the road ahead was uncertain, and Chloe knew the real battle had only just begun. She turned toward the door, but before she could leave, Vanessa's voice stopped her. Chloe, Vanessa said quietly. I'm sorry. I really am. You'll never know how sorry. Chloe didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already out, and the rest would come in time. As she stepped out of the apartment, the weight of the situation pressed harder against her chest. There was no going back now. But Chloe was ready. She had to be. The final confrontation was coming. And Chloe would face it, no matter the cost. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video with your friends. Let's spread the message together.